Welcome, everyone. I'd like to get the meeting started on time. Seems like we have a long time, but I know that it probably is going to go quickly. We have a lot of information to cover today. So good afternoon. My name is Janet Pauley. I'm the chair of the Mendocino County Inland Water and Power Commission, who's sponsoring this workshop to discuss Potter Valley Project decommissioning, the impacts and what's being done to secure the region's water supply. Before we begin, we have a little bit of housekeeping. All of the member agencies of IWPC are elected boards and bound by the Brown Act. I want to give each of our boards a minute to call their meetings to order and to do a roll call, and I will begin for the Mendocino County Inland Water and Power Commission, calling this meeting to order. Roll call. Representative for the Mendocino County Water Agency, Commissioner Madeline Klein.
Here.
Representative for the City of Ukiah, Commissioner Mari Roden.
Here.
Representative for Redwood Valley County Water District, Commissioner Tom Schoeneman. Representative for Mendocino County Flood Control and Water Conservation Improvement District, Commissioner John Reardon.
Here.
Representative for Potter Valley Irrigation District, and that is me. I'd like to recognize each of the other member agencies of IWPC so they can call their meetings to order if they wish, and I'd like to start with the Mendocino County Water Agency. Supervisor Haschak?
Water, Board of Supervisors.
Yes, you sit as that board too.
Yeah. So I'm going to have Atlas Pearson do the roll call.
Supervisor Klein.
Here.
Supervisor Molnar.
Here.
Supervisor Patrick.
Here.
Supervisor Norvell.
Here.
Supervisor Lewis.
Here.
John, if you want to.
And we're going to do our public expression with yours.
All right, thank you. All right. City of Ukiah, you wish to call your board to order? Okay, that's fine. Redwood Valley County Water Agency, anyone from Redwood Valley? Mendocino County Flood Control and Water Conservation Improvement District.
I don't think this is a meeting for us.
All right. Potter Valley Irrigation District noticed this meeting, so I will call that meeting to order, and our roll call. Director McFadden. Guinness? He's here. Director Magruder. Director Thornton. Oh, they're all working. Director Gentini.
Here.
Thank you. Okay, before turning the program over to our speakers, I'd like to quickly introduce them. We have Mr. Eric Nagy, IWPC consultant with Larson, Worzel and Associates. Mr. Tom Johnson, IWPC consultant, Thomas R. Johnson, LLC. Mr. David Manning, Executive Director of the Eel Russian Project Authority. Mr. Don Seymour, Deputy Director of Engineering, Sonoma County Water Agency. Before I ask Mr. Scott Shapiro, who's counsel for IWPC and IRPA, to begin the presentation and go over the agenda with you, I would like to quickly say a few words about the format for the workshop. Yes. I think John.
He said he was going to match.
Okay, sorry.
We'll do it now.
Another housekeeping. I'm opening this up for public expression for anything that is not on the agenda. Does anybody have a comment? Anything that is not on the agenda? Okay, thank you. Thanks, Scott. After the presentation, we are going to open the meeting for you to be able to ask questions for the panel to answer. This workshop is being videoed and recorded. The PowerPoint and all of that information will be available on several websites and platforms that we'll list at the end of our session today. And with that, I'd like to turn the program over to Mr. Scott Shapiro.
Thank you, Janet. Good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate you finding the time to be here, in particular on a weekday.
I know we got some feedback from folks that it would be great if these were, this could also be done on a weekday evening, and so that's something that the board will certainly consider because we want to make sure everyone has a chance to participate. My name is Scott Shapiro. I'm special counsel for the Mendocino County Inland Water and Power Commission. I'm going to be one of the presenters today. We also wanted to acknowledge that this is the work day for many people, and so we're talking about trying to replicate this or do a series where the next one would be in the evening, which would allow more people to participate who can participate in the evenings but not during the day. And so we've broken today up into 5 sections. We're going to talk about PG&E and FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and then the Water Diversion Agreement. You might think of those two as the past. And then an overview of NERF, the new EL Russian facility, and the options that were under consideration now for storage, and then next steps. You might think of those as the future. And so while we set the agenda up originally to have Q&A at the end on everything, I think we're going to at least try to do some Q&A after item B, so that we're not requiring you to sit through an hour and a half of talking to ask questions about what happens in the first few minutes. So if you can be patient when we get to the end of B, we'll do some Q&A. We'll do a little bit time limited because we want to make sure we have time to get through the presentation and do questions on the rest of it as well. And if you're online, we're going to ask you that you'll be able to ask your questions by speaking into your phone or your computer, but we are going to do the ones in the room first. And Candace will keep you muted and then unmute you at the appropriate time when we get to those questions. So we have, as Janet indicated, folks on our right, so that everyone kind of knows the order of show. I'm going to do A and B. David Manning is going to do most of C, and then Tom Johnson and Eric Nagy are going to do most of D. And Don Seymour from Sonoma Water is here kind of as a call a friend in an emergency to provide support for questions that folks may have, and in particular for the Q&A, because he's the guy who knows in depth the operation of Lake Mendocino. And we're trying not to go as in depth so we actually get through this, but we want the expertise here. And Don kindly delayed his vacation for a day to join us, so we're thankful he was able to come. So I have one slide on A, PG&E and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. And really limited it to one slide because I was trying not to spend all of our time on something that for a lot of people they've had a chance to process, but we also didn't want to prejudge that for others they didn't. So we've included it here, and I'm going to do my best to go through it comprehensively but not take so much time so we have time to get to the other items. I also want to note that we have regular communication with PG&E, and PG&E is quite willing to come and be part of one of these meetings and to answer questions you have about it and its role in this process. But because we were limiting the presentation on this topic today, we elected not to ask them to come. But we will include them in a future one of the series, perhaps the next one. And so if you have questions about PG&E, their decision making, what they're doing, why they're doing it, they are quite willing to come. They are not here running away. They are making the decision to support us and what our needs are, and we have told them we will have needs for them to come in the future. So as I think most of you know, PG&E currently operates the Potter Valley Project, and it does move water from the Eel River watershed into the Russian River watershed, and that water has historically been available for use. I think you've also heard through a lot of meetings and articles and blogs and Substacks and podcasts that PG&E has made the decision to stop operating the Potter Valley Project because it's cost inefficient at this point. It did make an effort to find someone to purchase the project. No one stepped forward with the resources to be able to do so. And so it's now informed FERC, the federal entity that regulates its operation of the project, that it intends to surrender the license and decommission the project, and that does include taking out the dams. If you take a look at the Federal Energy Act, which provides the authority for how all this happens, once that election is made, once PG&E says this is the step we're going on, there's no forks in the road. It's just a straight road that leads from here to the end, and the authority that FERC has is to place conditions on the decommissioning to meet certain federal statutory goals, such as restoration of the environment and things like that. And if you're not aware, PG&E did notice the application, and FERC has said that it is now accepting comments on that application, and it's accepting intervention into that application. And the deadline for that is currently December 1st at 2 p.m., not 5 p.m. So if you're interested in doing it, please make sure you're on that website before 2 p.m. on the 1st to get your name in. And if you intervene, you basically say, I want to be part of this, I have an interest in this, and you explain that interest, and if FERC lets you into that process, then you will receive notice of everything that happens going forward. Every time FERC takes an action or proposes to take an action, everything they tell PG&E to do, everything PG&E responds saying that they will do or how they'll do it, you will get notice on. And for substantive decisions, FERC will be asking those who have intervened for their opinion and thoughts on it. So if you care about this topic, beyond coming to these meetings and sharing your voice, we neither encourage or discourage, but want you to be aware of this opportunity to be in front of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We understand this deadline may get extended because several federal agencies have asked for it to be extended, but that has not yet happened, and you don't want to miss the deadline if you want to apply. So 2 p.m., because that's 5 p.m. Eastern, on the 1st is the deadline to try to intervene in this FERC action. So I'm going to go to the second slide now, and again, after that second slide, we can do a brief Q&A if folks want to talk about these topics. So secondly is the water diversion agreement. Now, IWPC, the Mendocino County Inland Water and Power Commission, has had numerous interactions with PG&E to try to maintain some significant level of control over the project. We put our hands up when they asked if someone wanted to buy it. We put our hands up when the question was, are you willing to take this license over and do the studies? And when those opportunities faded, we put our hands up with others and said, we are willing to purchase assets from the project. And that's the context we're in. We're trying to purchase assets from PG&E. We're trying to purchase the tunnel, and we're trying to purchase the water rights. Now, not everybody is interested in having water continue to be diverted from the Eel River to the Russian River. There are folks on the Eel River watershed. Frankly, there are folks in the Russian River watershed that would prefer the water stay in the Eel. And we are an applicant to PG&E to buy assets. And so in our conversations with PG&E was very clear to us that the way it would be interested in interacting with us and selling assets is if it did not have to make a choice between basins. It's like the parent that doesn't want to choose between the two children who the favorite child is. It doesn't want to have to pick the eel over the Russian or the Russian over the eel. And so the clear message we received from PG&E over many months was, go find a way that the two basins can come together and agree on what a future looks like. And a number of parties came together to try to do that. And ultimately, we executed what we call on here in the second bullet, the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding. And that was back on February 7th of this year. That MOU was to come to essential terms on how the two basins could agree that water would continue to be diverted into the Russian. And that MOU was executed between IWPC, the Mendocino County Inland Water and Power Commission, the Sonoma County Water Agency, a newly formed agency called ERPA, or the Eel Russian Project Authority, which is made up of Sonoma and IWPC, the Round Valley Indian Tribe, which sits on the Eel River and has an unquantified senior claim to water on that river, Cal Trout, Trout Unlimited, and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And those are the parties that came together to say, we think we can make this work. We think we can find a way where the folks in the Eel Basin who would prefer water not be diverted are okay with water continuing to be diverted under certain conditions, And we can find a way that the Russian River folks say, yes, we are willing to agree to those conditions to guarantee that water continuing to come. And that led to the MOU in the second bullet. And following that MOU, we negotiated for a number of additional months, and we ultimately agreed on the WDA, the Water Diversion Agreement. And that is the agreement that guarantees the Russian River Basin has a right to divert water in the future, assuming that PG&E sells it to us. And PG&E has now initiated negotiations with us to actually sell the assets to us. So you might not like how we got here, and I understand some folks don't. But we got here as an attempt to make the best lemonade we could out of lemons, not being able to buy the whole thing ourselves, not being able to acquire the license ourselves, and needing to convince PG&E that we had a regional deal that would allow them to not have to pick sides. If you're interested in reviewing the Water Diversion Agreement, you'll see it on that on the website. It's listed there at the very bottom. It's www.eelrussianauthority.org, and under the Reports tab, you can find that document and download it and learn more about it. I'm going to go back 2 slides just for context. So what I just hit was A and B. It was really to tell you kind of how we got here. And we will do some Q&A in a second, but what we're going to do next after that is talk about what the first thing is we would build, the facility we would build to be able to move water physically from the Eel Basin to the Russian River watershed. That's item C. And then we're going to talk about storage. And I just want to explain why those are kind of 2 different things, because it's not always clear in some of the reading that I've seen. Many folks are aware there are 2 dams on the Eel River system that are associated with the Potter Valley project. There's the dam that makes Lake Pillsbury upstream, and Lake Pillsbury is a storage facility. Water is stored there for use at different times. And then there's a lower dam that makes up the Van Arsdale facility, and Van Arsdale is not a storage reservoir, it's very small. It is there only to cause water to be high enough to back up into the tunnel, that tunnel that exists between the 2 basins that will continue to be used. And so when we talk about the new Eel Russian facility, the NERF pumping plant, that's to replace the lower dam. So instead of backing water up into the tunnel, which creates a barrier and has other problems, we're instead going to pump water into the tunnel. But that doesn't replace Lake Pillsbury. Lake Pillsbury is the upstream storage, the one that is owned by PG&E, the one that PG&E says has seismic concerns, the one that has been kept at a very low level for several years now due to those stated concerns. And that's the one that creates the storage that allows water to be stored in the winter and used in the summer. And so when we get to D, D is the replacement for Lake Pillsbury. C is the replacement for Van Arsdale, how we physically divert the water. D is the replacement for Lake Pillsbury when we're storing the water to use it at a different time. So I just wanted that context to be clear. And I'm now happy to do a brief Q&A with folks if you have questions you'd like to talk about on the first 2 topics, the FERC process or the water diversion agreement. I think we'll probably allocate around 10-ish minutes now so that we make sure we have enough time for questions at the end on the other topics. So we have a question here, and we have a gentleman with a microphone who's rushing to your side. Slowly rushing.
Can it be a question or can it be a comment?
You know, it could be a comment, but if you're...
I'll term it as a question.
A question would be good, or comments at the very end, but I really want to make sure we give people a chance to ask questions about what we're talking about now while it's fresh.
I'm Greg Young, the Environmental Director of the Potter Valley Tribe. Do any of you know that the Round Valley Indian Reservation, or Indian Tribe, has no property whatsoever on the main stem Eel River?
Yes.
You knew that?
Yes.
Any of you other guys know that? Good. It's not generally presented. Did you know that the Potter Valley Tribe has property right on the main stem of the Eel River, one of them in trust, and about 890 acres of property right across Eel River Road that encompasses the Trout Creek watershed?
And is some of that
Know
the conservation easement that you acquired from PG&E at the
PG&E.
bankruptcy?
It's under
Yes.
conservation.
Yes.
You all knew that? I don't see anybody answering.
I don't know if everyone knew it, but some people in the room knew it.
Now everybody knows.
Now everyone knows.
And so we have a dedicated presence to that area and stipulations under the conservation easement, and we're also doing water quality monitoring on the Eel River presently under a US EPA program. And so Round Valley Indian Tribes managed to get an agreement, an MOA that's not done yet, but for $1 million a year forever, adjusted for inflation. And did you know that we will ask for part of that also, just to make it question that one?
I do now. Thank you. Thank you. Other questions that we can speak to? Yes. Or I'm going to have you call on folks because I'm not necessarily looking around.
So you use the term "the Russian has a right." I thought that the Round Valley Indian tribes were getting the rights and that the Russian had a contract for delivery of that water for the next 30 to 50 years. Or am I misunderstanding? This is really serious for me. Like, are the Russian interests getting a water right? I thought you were just having a contract with somebody else who had a water right.
Yeah, I said a right, and I was referring to a contractual right.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And so to clarify for everyone, to make sure everyone understands the question really goes to who owns the water right during this 50-year period. And the water diversion agreement provides that the Round Valley Indian Tribe will hold the water right, which will be exercised by ERPA, the EO Russian Project Authority. So it holds the physical right. And then there is a contractual right for the delivery of that water, which will be held by ERPA. And that's actually very similar to a lot of other water projects in the state. For those of you who are familiar with the Central Valley Project, for example, the Bureau of Reclamation holds the water right, and then Westlands Water District or whoever has a contractual right to get water from the project. So it's that model.
And it's a limited time right. Is that correct?
That
contract is for a limited time.
It is correct. It is currently set as a maximum 50-year term subject to renewal if the parties agree. That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So the sir had a question, and then looks like over there someone.
So I can hold it. I'm big enough. Okay, my question is going to be probably a little later it should have been, but I want it known to Mr. Dave Manning because in August there was a PG&E webinar on this subject, and I typed in my answer or my question, and guess what? At the end of the program, they said, well, I guess we have no more questions. It never got answered, so that tells me how much I respect PG&E. It was for Dave Manning and the project. So I want to ask the question now so you can address it during your talk. The question was, there is a short window of time for the dewatering of the Van Arsdale Dam or Cape Horn Dam that this project that you want to put in to transfer the water has to be done in. Now, I know that you have the funds for the study, but I've never seen anywhere where you have the funds for the construction. And that's where I disagree on having two projects. It should be one project, and it anchors PG&E to make sure that this happens. Because if the funding isn't there and it doesn't happen, everybody that depends on this water is going to fail. So one project is what I believe it ought to be, and I really reprimand PG&E for not answering everybody's questions, because that was for you and they didn't pass it on to you apparently.
Thank you, sir. Yes, you have your marching orders for your presentation. There's a gentleman in the second row, I think, who has his hand up, and then someone in the back.
Thank you. You mentioned that, I'm going back a little bit for my own understanding, that your agency actually raised their hand when PG&E was saying, does anybody want to take this over? But I didn't understand, well, why did that not happen? Was it economics? Was it liability? What transpired that finally everything, they say that no one came forward when you said that you and other agencies were raising your hand?
I'm going to give a fast answer, and I'm going to be looking at Janet the whole time to make sure I get it right, because it predates my involvement with the project. But there were two different instances. The first time is that we raised our hand, and then PG&E decided to go a different route, so that route became irrelevant. And the second time, we raised our hands with a number of other parties, and we had to engage with FERC, and we needed to demonstrate we had the financial capability of doing the $10 to $20 million of studies that were required. And we scrounged around, we looked in the couch cushions, we tried to get some money from other agencies, and we could not raise that amount of money. And so we didn't have the financial wherewithal to continue that process. And ultimately, we sent a notice to FERC that said it. So did I get those two right? Okay, so those are the two opportunities. So one was self-inflicted, if you will, we couldn't get the money. And the second was external inflicted, which was PG&E decided to go a different route with how it was proceeding with the project.
A follow-up question is, was there ever a discussion about keeping the dam at Lake Pillsbury? Is that a bygone issue that once you said that PG&E decided we're going this way, that was not an issue to be discussed any further?
Yeah, we don't own that dam, obviously, right? We don't have any control over it. We have benefited from it for years, although less recently now that they're keeping it low. And so I think it would be disingenuous to say that we're thrilled that dam is coming out, because it has provided essential storage for our community. But we have examined the law and have determined we don't have a basis to require that dam to stay. I will point out that when PG&E said, would anyone like to purchase any of these assets? And we put our hands up specifically for the diversion facility, the tunnel and the water rights. We didn't put our hands up for Lake Pillsbury because we had already worked out the agreement whereby the Eel River interest would support our diversion. And that agreement was that we were not going to be against Lake Pillsbury coming out. That was the condition of them agreeing they were okay with continued diversion. Others could have raised their hand for Lake Pillsbury. I don't know if there's anyone from Lake County in the room, but Lake County could have raised their hand and said, we would like to acquire Lake Pillsbury. They didn't, and I'm only assuming they didn't for the same reason, well, for a good reason, and I think that reason is that dam would be remarkably expensive to retrofit. I don't know, I don't speak for them, but there was an opportunity that PG&E gave everyone to say, I want to acquire an asset, and no one stepped forward to acquire Lake Pillsbury. I think Janet wants to correct or add to what I said.
When PG&E originally decided to auction the project and IWPC stepped up, that would have entailed IWPC actually owning and operating the project as it was in that time period, and that was in 2018. That's when PG&E took another route. Right before we completed the indicative proposal, PG&E changed their mind, decided not to auction the project, but instead decided to withdraw their notice of intent to relicense. And that's where the split came, where owning and operating the project became a moot point in terms of PG&E's legal position with FERC.
I think I'm going to suggest we do one more. There's a gentleman in the back I know who's been waiting, and if there's someone urgently, I see one more urgent on there, but then I want to make sure we leave time at the end. So if you can wait until the end, I promise we'll get to your question.
Hi, I just want to go back to the water diversion agreement. And can we talk a little bit more into detail about the length of that diversion agreement and what off-ramps are included in that agreement?
Sure. So the agreement is for a maximum 50 years. It starts with an initial 30-year term. And there are a list of 5 or so conditions that, if they're met, provides a guaranteed 20-year extension. Those are 5 commitments that are good for the watershed and good for the fish and good for the people. We're going to do our best to conserve water. We're going to continue to try to develop storage and other water sources. We're going to make sure that our taking the water isn't destroying the fishery. And as long as those conditions are met, there's an automatic 20-year renewal. At the end of the 20-year renewal, then it's discretionary as to whether there'll be further renewals after that. At that point, I'll also note that the tunnel will be 170 years old. It may not be the best way of moving water anymore. We'll the next generation or 2 generations after will have to figure that out. Does that answer your questions?
A little bit. There is other partners in the ERPA group that have talked publicly about possibilities of having it be a 5-year intermissions and a maximum of a 30-year license, and suggesting that they could pull the plug on the NERF facility within 5 years of its creation. And I guess that's where I am wondering what the validity to that argument is.
So I did note on the website, and by the way, this material will all be available. Candace will post it to the IWPC website so you can find the link to pull the agreement down. All I can guess that you're referring to is that there are these 5-year check-ins. Are the fish doing okay? And really the question isn't, are the fish doing okay? The questions are, is our diversion preventing the fish from doing okay? That is the 5-year check-ins that are occurring. Are our diversions preventing the fish from doing okay? My argument would be if they are, we have other problems. We have Federal Endangered Species Act violations that are occurring, and we're going to be changing our operation anyway. But that may be the 5-year you're talking about. We have to limit this section just so we make sure we get to everything else. I do see a lot of hands. There was a woman over here, if we could do her, and then I'm going to ask if you guys can hold till the next set of Q&A, just so that we can make sure we get to all the new work that we're doing and the storage we're exploring.
With regard to the water diversion, I understand you said it guarantees the right to water if PG&E, and that PG&E is negotiating it with you. But what hasn't been discussed is the MOU itself, and that MOU appears to have quite a bit of wiggle room in it, meaning that diversions aren't guaranteed. So my question is, are water diversions guaranteed for the Russian?
So let me get a little bit of a roundabout way, and then you tell me if I've answered your question. You mentioned the MOU, and the MOU was really replaced by the water diversion agreement. The MOU is the concept. The water diversion agreement is the binding agreement. So first thing I would say is if you're looking at the MOU and you have questions, I would encourage you to look at the water diversion agreement, because that's the contractually bound signed agreement that a party can sue on and saying, we're not getting what we bargained for. That's where the detail is important. In answer to the question that I think you're getting, which is how sure are we that there will be water we can divert and people can stop us from diverting it, we have negotiated that agreement as strongly as we think we can, and it actually has language in it that says things like, let me back up, there's a concept in law called specific performance. You go to buy a refrigerator from the local store, and the local store is out of refrigerators. Generally in law, you can't get the refrigerator if they don't have one. What you can do is get monetary damages that have been caused by them not giving you a refrigerator. Well, we've put in that agreement, there are no such thing as monetary damages that'll make us whole. The only thing that'll make us whole is the water. So if they have the water, and we have performed as we're required to under the agreement, a court has to let us have the water. Now, if we don't perform, we don't pay, we don't do the things we have to do, absolutely they can stop delivering the water. That's what an agreement is. But if we do what we are supposed to be doing, the agreement says we get the water, and it lets us sue to get the water. So I hope that's a direct enough answer. Did I answer your question?
Pretty much. I think the whole idea is whether there's water to divert, and that's the question.
That is, and that's a great lead-in to David Manning, who's going to talk about a whole bunch of graphs and charts that talk about when the water is and why this diversion is so important for us in the Russian River watershed. So I'm going to hand it over to David now, and David, you can just up arrow and down arrow to get where you need to go.
Very good, Scott. Thank you very much. Again, my name is David Manning, Executive Director of the Eel Russian Project Authority. And I think I'd like to start off first by at least partially answering the question that you raised, sir. And I'm sorry that during that PG&E-led webinar, we weren't able to get to all the questions that were asked. The question is, can PG&E consider this project that I'm going to describe to you a part of their decommissioning? And they are, in a way. They can't be the owners. They've made it clear that they are decommissioning and surrendering the project so that they no longer have an ownership interest in this project for their ratepayers. All the infrastructure will be transferred, the parts that are needed for the new Eel Russian facility, or they'll be decommissioned and removed. The one-way PG&E has made some really great efforts to cooperate with us, is in this very technical term that you'll probably see online if you do some researching, called a non-project use of project lands. That is a companion to their submission to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, that license surrender application that allows FERC to allow the Eel Russian Project Authority to construct the new Eel Russian facility. At the same time, PG&E is removing Cape Horn Dam, removing their other facilities. As long as the activities of developing the new Eel Russian facility don't affect their ability to surrender and decommission, the construction of the new Eel Russian facility and the decommissioning can happen simultaneously. And what we're proposing is that it happens at exactly the same time in exactly the same place. So when the river is isolated per PG&E's plans to remove Cape Horn Dam, we can come in and do the construction to build the new Eel Russian facility at the same time, minimize as much as possible any disruption in the diversion. So PG&E can't be made responsible to do that, but they are at least partnering with the Eel Russian Project Authority to make sure that there's a seamless transition, as seamless as is possible under the Federal Power Act. And
You want to make it more seamless? Require them to fund the loan. Got to make it ironclad.
yeah, I mean, the short answer to that is, unfortunately, the Eel Russian Project Authority can't compel PG&E as a private business to invest in this sustainable diversion that we're creating. We are, and I can talk about this a little bit, approaching the state, the federal government. We've had some commitments already. There will be more fundraising needed after this design and permitting phase to build the project, the capital costs of the project. And we can talk about that some more. Maybe I'll get into how the project functions. I only have a few slides, and then we can talk more about the future, the next steps in trying to make that project a reality. So some of what you'll see on the screen here, Scott already described. I think we all know this gravity diversion was year-round. That all changes, as Scott mentioned, so that now we will have a seasonal diversion, and I'll describe how that works. And the new Eel Russian facility, it's being designed to pump between 10 and 300 CFS when water is available, and water is available often in the Eel River, and we'll show you some of that just right now. There are pumping rules described in the water diversion agreement that Scott just discussed that lay out this schedule of how flows can be diverted from the Eel River seasonally in a way that protects fish and aquatic life in the Eel River. So in this figure, you'll see the 4 seasons of the year, a floor, so a minimum amount of water that has to be remaining in the Eel River. Above that floor, water can be pumped up to a certain percentage of the flow, depending on season. 20 to 30% of the flow can be diverted up to the maximum capacity of the tunnel. The maximum capacity of that tunnel is 300 CFS. And there is a ramping up of the flow that can be diverted up to that 300 CFS so that the shape of the hydrograph, the sort of natural pattern of the rise and fall of flow in the Eel River, isn't dramatically affected by the water as it's being diverted. Now, each season has a different floor because the needs of fish, passage of juvenile fish as they reside in that section of the Eel River changes seasonally. Even during the summertime, it is theoretically possible, if there is enough water, at least 35 CFS in the main stem of the Eel River, to divert some of that flow above that floor into the Russian. Most of the middle of the summertime, that's not going to occur. Just because the flows naturally without the presence of Lake Pillsbury, of Scott Dam, of even Cape Horn Dam, there simply isn't that much natural flow in the Eel River. So in the depths of the summertime, there will effectively be no diversion, but there are many opportunities to divert in the fall, in the winter, and in the spring. And if we take a look at this figure, and we can spend a few minutes on this, and all these slides will be available for everyone to see after the presentation. The next few slides are examples of how that diversion works using modeled data. That's why I've got Don Seymour here to my right. Very sophisticated hydraulic and hydrologic models that take in more than 100 years of data and modeled when the new Eel Russian facility, using those rules that I just showed you, can divert water into storage in Lake Mendocino. So what we're looking at here are a couple things on the plot. On the left-hand side, you've got the storage levels in Lake Mendocino. On the right-hand side, you've got the amount of water that can be diverted in cubic feet per second through the tunnel into the Russian River Basin. That dashed line at the top represents the storage curve for Lake Mendocino. I think most folks realize Lake Mendocino is operated as a multi-purpose facility. In the wintertime, less water can be stored because there needs to be space in the reservoir for the Army Corps of Engineers to operate flood control. We've made some improvements, something called Forecast Informed Reservoir Operations, I'm sure you've probably heard about, to make it easier to store more water supply in the wintertime in the lake. But you'll see that there's down at that 80,000 acre foot level, that's the level through most of the wintertime in the reservoir when flows go beyond that. So the blue line, if you can see going above that dash line, is the storage in Lake Mendocino. When that storage goes above that level in the wintertime, the Army Corps of Engineers releases it to maintain flood capacity in the reservoir. So the new Eel Russian facility can divert water up to that 300 CFS limit, but it can't be stored in Lake Mendocino unless either the size of Lake Mendocino is increased or the Army Corps of Engineers changes its flood control operations, which is, that latter part is not likely. So in the shaded region of the plot, so you'll see those sort of tan areas, that's when the new Eel Russian facility would operate and that water can be stored in the reservoir. The rectangle in the middle represents times when the new Eel Russian facility could divert water, but there isn't enough space in Lake Mendocino to store it. And there are some statistics for this example year. This is from 2017. The new Eel Russian facility, operating with those rules that I described, could divert 86,000 acre feet of water into Lake Mendocino. But because there are those limitations on storage, the actual volume that's diverted and stored is more like 24,500 acre feet. So the rules, those diversion rules themselves, and what's described in the water diversion agreement, are often not the limitation as to how water can be diverted and stored in Lake Mendocino. It's really the physical capacity of Lake Mendocino. But that is not the case in a lot of other year types. So we take a look, for example, at a dry year like 2014, at a more average year like 2009, those diversion rules allow that water to be diverted, and it is all put to storage in Lake Mendocino. It's incredibly valuable to have the new Eel Russian facility continue to provide this diversion, critical to the reliability of Lake Mendocino. And we can see that if we look at the amount of water sort of historically under current operations that can be stored in Lake Mendocino and project that to what happens with the new Eel Russian facility, and if there were no Potter Valley Project diversions at all, or no new Eel Russian facilities. So this plot looks at something slightly different. This is the storage in Lake Mendocino at the end of the water year, going into the next water year. So September 30th, and this is modeled data using that long hydrologic data set. So if we look at, with Potter Valley Project's current operations, about 57,000 acre feet of water on average is stored in Lake Mendocino at the end of that water year. With the new Eel Russian facility, there's a dip to about 51,000 acre feet, but without the facility at all, and with no Potter Valley Project diversions, that storage goes down to 25,000 acre feet. 25,000 acre feet, and that is an average, is a very small amount of water. We have some statistics on the side of the slide that show you it hasn't been that low except in the depth of the two biggest droughts we've had in the last 117 years, 1977 to 2021. And there are a lot of years, because that's an average, there would effectively be no water to be released to continue flows as we have come to expect them downstream of Lake Mendocino. Let's take a look at the tunnel diversions now over time and sort of compare where we have been historically to where we can go with the NERF and where we hope to go with additional storage. So in this plot, we're looking at the tunnel diversions through the Potter Valley Project from historically 1922 to 2005, a lot of water. Hydroelectric facilities operating year-round, no significant restrictions to how that water is used on the Eel River, 150,000 acre-feet per year coming through the tunnel. Starting in 2006, 2007, due to Endangered Species Act concerns and regulations on the Eel River, that amount of diversion decreased to about 60,000 acre-feet. When PG&E stopped operating the power plant, when we had years of drought, and now the restrictions on storage that Scott mentioned for seismic safety reasons up at Scott Dam, that average has dropped in recent years to about 40,000 acre-feet. Now, the new Eel Rushing facility operating, as I just described it to you, on average can deliver about 30,000 acre-feet of water through the tunnel, and that's water headed to Lake Mendocino. That's water in Potter Valley that can be used in Potter Valley, but that's without any additional storage to take maximum advantage of that water. If we look at how those rules work and how much water could be diverted on average, that's that last bar on the far right-hand side that's boxed in green, about 60,000 acre-feet. So there is a lot of potential to maintain some reliability in Lake Mendocino or enhance it compared to some of the recent past with the implementation of the new Eel Rushing facility. Go back one slide. This is the only image in the presentation we have of what we call the NERF, the new Eel Rushing facility. I brought along some poster boards afterwards if you'd like to see more of the details of what's involved in the construction of the facility. I'm happy to share that. There are a lot of other presentations in the past that have done so. This is an image looking downstream up through the site of former Cape Horn Dam. On the right-hand side of the image, you can see this large retaining wall. There's a green metal building that's a pump house. There are screens that prevent fish from being entrained into those pumps. Those pumps lift the water up to the existing entrance of the tunnel, where it then flows by gravity down to Russian. Fish, as they're passing up and downstream through the Eel River, are not impacted by that screen diversion. We call it a run-of-the-river diversion. This is volitional fish passage. Fish are able to ascend and descend that section of the Eel River unaided. We are going to describe all of those environmental impacts in CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act, EIR. That process will begin soon. We are taking an item to Sonoma County Water Agency's Board of Directors to allow an environmental consulting firm to begin the process of developing the CEQA document. That's on behalf of the Eel Rushing Project Authority. It will take about 24 months for that process to play out. Some of you may have just commented on the State Water Resources Control Board's CEQA process for PG&E's surrender and decommissioning. There are two parallel tracks, and this is one way we're trying to ensure this facility can be constructed at the same time PG&E is surrendering and decommissioning their project. The State Water Resources Control Board is conducting CEQA for the surrender and decommissioning process. The Eel Rushing Project Authority will be the lead agency for its own CEQA for the construction and the operation of the new Eel Rushing facility. So you will see us announce scoping meetings, coming out to get public comment. Those processes will run for about 2 years in parallel. There are a lot of other steps coming up in the next 5 years. The first couple bullets on this slide are just reminders of some of the near-term things that have happened. The license surrender application, which was submitted to FERC on July 25. December 1 is the deadline, as a lot of folks know, to get comments in to FERC on their surrender and decommissioning process. Between now and 2030, I'm not going to read all of the things on this slide, but there are a lot of steps to go through in terms of engineering design and environmental compliance there is a whole host of permits and processes that need to be adhered to for both the new Eel Russian facility and for PG&E in their surrender and decommissioning process. Working through all of those things, and this is just a guess because there is no statutory timeline, perhaps by 2031, there's a surrender order from FERC, and then final steps to get to the place where both the new Eel Russian facility and the decommissioning can happen concurrently. We're guessing sometime after the year 2031. So I think with that, maybe, would you like me to pause, Scott, and take any immediate questions, or would you like to move right into the next set
We
of
can do
items?
10 minutes of questions
Sure.
on this section. That makes sense before we get to storage.
Yeah.
Could you go back to the previous slide? I had a question about that. So you said that we're looking at it from the north to the south?
We're actually looking at it from the yes, upstream. So we're standing downstream looking upstream
Okay, so
through this
the water
image.
in that picture is going up? No.
That is correct.
It's not really in the picture, it's going up, but not.
So yeah, so if you were standing downstream at the base of Cape Horn Dam, and that's why I brought some poster boards so you can see this better by looking at the perspective above and then with Cape Horn Dam there. Cape Horn Dam is gone in this image. So PG&E, this is a future after PG&E removes what we consider the spillway of Cape Horn Dam, as well as on the left-hand side of this image is a large earthen embankment that's also part of the dam. All of that is gone. All of the dam removal pieces would be done by PG&E as a part of their
With your finger,
license surrender
which way
order.
the water's going? That's what I'm not getting.
Toward us, coming toward us, coming out of the screen.
Okay.
The water's coming out of the screen toward us. Yes.
What is the lift required to, like currently, what is Van Marsdale creating for lift to make it a gravity flow? And it seems like it was a real quick decision that we needed to go to pump somehow. How much thought was put into that? It seems crazy to me that we're giving up on a gravity system and putting in pumps and, 50 years of pumping. That's a lot of cost that maybe some more effort into a gravity-fed diversion could be used.
That's a great question. About 5 or so years of consideration of other types of diversions. And Scott mentioned the website eelrussianauthority.org. There are feasibility studies, including one completed just last year, that lays out a variety of alternatives that were considered, and they were considered from an engineering analysis perspective as well as an environmental perspective. There was a committee on the environmental side of 10 different agencies with 30 individuals, and that's resource agencies, that's tribes, that's water managers from the Russian River side, looking at the costs and benefits of building a facility that allows fish to pass, because that is absolutely essential, with either a gravity-fed diversion or a pumped alternative. There was no way to get past removing all of the facility, the dam facility that's there. The one gravity diversion option would have involved building something called a roughened channel, and this is detailed in this report. There's a lot of information about it, costs, pros and cons on a lot of different levels. Getting fish to ascend that roughened channel, which is all constructed of boulders and rocks, about 9 acres of material to build that feature up to the height of the existing diversion, was deemed to be too risky for fish passage and difficult for maintenance and more expensive actually than the pumped.
50 years of pumping?
Then the pumping costs themselves are a relatively small proportion of the operating expenses for the new Russian facility. Now that doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense, but it is less than 20% of the cost on an annual basis of operating the facility. The lift that's required, and Tom, as the engineer, or Don can correct me, I think it's around 30 or 40 feet is what water is lifted. 30 feet. 5%. There we go. That study is on the new Eel Russian. It's on the Eel Russian Project Authority's website. So eelrussianauthority.org has a website. On it there are documents there are files, there's a whole list of feasibility studies, pretty easy to navigate to. There's not a lot on the page, but it's got all of those studies that were used as the foundation for determining the pumped alternative was superior to a gravity diversion.
There's also the consideration of the wild and scenic designation.
So we actually don't think that is. The question was, there's also a consideration of the wild and scenic designation for the Eel River. That's not something that we considered in those feasibility studies. That is a concern that people have raised, and this facility can be constructed and operated with that wild and scenic river designation. That is the Eel Russian Project Authority's belief and our council's belief as well. But that was actually not one of the considerations. It is certainly something to be covered in the CEQA process, and there will be a lot of issues to be resolved and described as we work through the environmental compliance process for the construction of this facility.
Okay. Hello?
Sure.
Okay, there's a lot of questions about permits and the legal responsibilities and all that of pumping the water and able to do that, okay? But the problem is that the water's not available in the summertime unless you have Lake Pillsbury. And that's what the Snow Mountain and Power Company discovered 100 years ago, that they couldn't run the power plant in the summertime, And also about 10 years ago, Fish and Game decided that a little bit more water going down the eel was not going to help the fish. It was going to kill them, okay? Because the water that goes down the eel from at Van Arsdale is basically in the winter time in the flood conditions, okay? So if you say, well, we're going to have more water, we need more water, well, you're not going to have more water through any kind of an agreement or permit. It's going to take a physical representation of a dam, such as Lake Pillsbury, okay? So then the question then is, if PG&E is going to decommission and remove and just get out of there, then what is the cost of that? Of removing the dam and the silt and the stuff behind it and all this stuff and the tunnel and everything, and then compare that with, okay, what if we upgraded Scott Dam, Van Arsdale, and the tunnel so it works? What would be the cost of that? And that would be an awful lot cheaper probably than removing the whole thing. So then maybe if PG&E, instead of them saying, well, they're going to sell the whole thing, well, the alternative to PG&E is, I think it was some number like $500 million to remove everything. Well, if there was an alternate of just patching things up and then agreeing to sell, maybe taking the facilities and transferring back over to Snow Mountain and Water and Power Company, that could then be owned by Mendocino and Sonoma County and Potter Valley or whoever else, then, that would be something that might be a lot cheaper and a lot more beneficial to PG&E. And PG&E might even agree, say, okay, we'll buy the power from that plant for the next 20 years or whatever at a profitable rate. So that's the kind of stuff we kind of got to look at, those numbers.
So I might stop you there. There were a lot of issues there that I think speak to PG&E's business decision to surrender and decommission the project. Yeah. Those are PG&E's decisions. Those are not the decisions of anyone in this room, the Eel Russian Project Authority, the County of Mendocino, Sonoma County, Mendocino Inland Water and Power Commission. What you're laying out did not seem viable to PG&E. They decided to surrender, decommission the dam. As Scott mentioned, they offered that project for sale, the entire project, pieces of it. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission asked anyone who wanted to operate that project to step in outside of PG&E when PG&E had no takers for that sale. No one stepped forward to take over that facility the way it exists right now. And PG&E, no one can compel PG&E to continue to operate that facility on terms other than its business decision-making process. The way that the project is surrendered or decommissioned, that is under the jurisdiction of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, but they cannot compel PG&E to keep facilities that they don't want to keep and to operate. So what we're showing you here today is the local reaction to that reality. And that reality is that if the water is going to continue to flow, diverted seasonally, this is the only opportunity to do so. No one else is coming forward to plan a future that provides any reliability for that water we've depended on for more than 100 years between the Eel and the Russian River. About the issue you raised concerning the flow and the seasonal nature of the facility, it is absolutely true that that diversion will not function in the summertime. It will not look like the existing Potter Valley project, either historically or in the very recent past, where there is year-round diversion. I think it's an excellent segue to the next part of this presentation. It's going to talk about how we maximize the ability to have this water diverted in all seasons except for the summer by creating local storage opportunities, increasing storage that already exists in the Russian River, thinking about new ways of taking advantage of that diversion to extend the reliability of water resources in the Russian River. It is a challenge, and we are all here. This is one part of the equation, and that's making sure the water continues to flow. The second part is trying to figure out how to store that water and use it most flexibly. Would you like to use that as a segue, Scott, or would you like to take a couple more questions? I'm happy to.
Why don't you do one more and then
Sure.
we'll turn to storage. And then that time at the end.
Very good.
So the chart you just presented showed a diversion of 40 CFS. Are you aware that PG&E has just requested that FERC allow them to limit the diversion to 5 CFS in the winter only?
I'd like to, was it this image that you saw here on this slide? So that reference you see there to 40 CFS, that is the point at which, and gets very technical, and I'm happy to talk to you a little bit more after the fact. That's when the diversion rate that's allowed in the summertime can be achieved, right? So this is, yes, and maybe we'll spend a bit more time talking about it. The floor is the most important part of this image. So if you look at the very top of that table, 300 CFS in the fall, 250 CFS in the winter, 125 CFS in the spring, 35 CFS in the summer. That's the amount of water that needs to stay in the Eel. Flow up when the flow in the Eel River rises above that level, up to 20 or 30% of that water can be diverted until you hit the maximum capacity of the tunnel, which is 300 CFS. So there's that term, that 20 to 30% is called a ramping rate. It allows water to be taken gradually so there's not a sudden drop in the amount of flow in the Eel River. The idea is to try to maintain the ecological integrity of those, what will be natural undammed flows in the Eel River, and siphon off water in a way that doesn't affect the ecosystem, the fish, and other aquatic life. And it's really important. The modeling and some of the results that we showed in those subsequent slides indicate that this works. We can actually take water and divert it in a way that allows the Eel River ecosystem to thrive. That was a key component of this water diversion agreement. Without that ability, I'm not sure we would have the support of those stakeholders in the Eel River, perhaps not even PG&E. So as Scott mentioned, this is a collaboration.
Petition to limit it to 5 CFS now.
So the current conditions of operating the Potter Valley project apply to that 5 CFS. So this is the future without the dams in place. It's not the same as the variance that PG&E is seeking from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So it's a little bit confusing. There are some near-term things happening right now until the time that the license is surrendered and the dams are removed. So PG&E is seeking from FERC right now a way of operating their project that is different than they have in the past while they're still operating the project while the dams are in place. The new Eel Russian facility would be implemented after the dams are removed and there is no longer a license in place that PG&E is guiding diversions by. This would be the new way that water is diverted between the watersheds. I hope that helps. It's a timing issue here. This is, the implementation of this project is at least 5 or 6 years away. In the next 5 or 6 years, PG&E wants to operate the existing project differently. And that's the 5 CFS that you're referencing. And we can talk, I don't know if we want to dive into the various actions in front of FERC right now.
I think afterwards, but Candace tells me there's some folks on this side who have had their hands up. So we do 2 questions from this side of the room so that we're spreading them out before we move on.
David, can you talk about the areas at the end of the
Sure.
And that will do that after the meeting.
Janet Pauley has offered to talk about the variances, which is not the nominal topic of the meeting today. We're really talking about the surrender and decommissioning, but she's offered to meet folks afterwards and talk to them a little bit more about those near-term requests that PG&E is making of FERC.
My question has to do more with the step-by-step process of what's happening each day if the decommissioning does go through. And one of my concerns mainly is the roads and how many vehicles and how many trucks are going to be traveling through Potter Valley. Right now, it's really tough to just make my way down the Potter Valley Road without blowing a shock or hurting my axle. So if there's going to be like 50 trucks a day removing the material, how is PG&E going to mitigate that as far as public safety goes, the roads, the amount of fuel? Is that going to be considered in the EIR report? And what does that look like for us in Potter Valley? Because our roads right now are so bad, you can't drive around with a trailer without lighting us on fire. I mean, it's just constantly, and so if you're going to be adding all of these huge trucks, how is this material going to be removed? Where is it going to? Is any of it going to be recycled? I mean, can't we recycle some of that dam material to build the new facility that you want? And where does this meet? Because if I'm going to be dealing with this every day for 10 to 15 years, it's not going to be a very pretty sight, I don't think, with us in PG&E.
So those are all excellent questions. Those honestly are questions for PG&E and both the NEPA and the CEQA process that they'll have to go through. So I think there's an opportunity to have those conversations with PG&E as their plans develop. So I can tell you right now, it's early in their process of developing management plans, of preparing, of the state board preparing their CEQA document, FERC preparing its NEPA document. Those are the perfect things that get addressed through those processes. And you have valid concerns and questions about how those effects will be mitigated, for sure.
And I brought these concerns up originally at the first online meeting also, and my question was not answered also. So I just wanted to let you know that my question was not answered, his question was not answered, and I don't know if anybody in this room ever had their question answered with the original PG&E online meeting.
I will pass that on to PG&E. I think PG&E probably does not yet have the answers to some of those questions, quite honestly. Scott reminded me to mention that if you would like to make a comment to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission about that surrender and decommissioning, a project like effects to local roads, traffic, how those effects will be mitigated, there is a process. You can talk to Scott, you can talk to Janet afterwards. There's an easy way to make a comment. Right now, while the comment period is open, again, it closes next Monday on the 1st, and that's the perfect thing that those regulatory agencies would like to hear about, honestly.
As long as it doesn't feel like putting a message in a bottle,
There are a lot of people commenting. I think those comments are read, and they are logged. I have seen hundreds so far. There are a lot of comments.
David, I'm curious as to how many cubic feet per second enter Pillsbury per season right now on your, do you have a chart that shows that?
I don't have that here, but we certainly have all those data, the unimpaired flows that enter Lake Pillsbury. Absolutely, that's an input in the modeling that was conducted, and we don't have it here today, but we can certainly get you those numbers. All right.
Hi, my name's Tom Johnson. I've been working on various aspects of this project for 5 or 6 years now. I have about 40 years of experience in working with PG&E, across the table from PG&E in power and water in California.
Can you get closer to your mic?
Sorry. I'll try and speak up, and hopefully people online can hear me as well. I'm going to talk a little bit about storage, or actually Eric and I are both going to talk a bit about storage. And one of the things that you'll notice right away from this intro slide is that there are 6 different storage or storage-like alternatives. And you would maybe immediately think, how come there are 5 or 6? Isn't there one? Well, the answer is that there is no silver bullet. All of these projects, all of these storage concepts have some strengths and some weaknesses, and we'll talk a little bit about that. What we're trying to do, as somebody earlier correctly pointed out, is we're trying to replace Lake Pillsbury storage, right? So we need to have storage that was in Lake Pillsbury somewhere in the Russian River. So when we have seasonal diversions, meaning wintertime, generally wintertime diversions, we can then store the water on the Russian side in order to be able to use it throughout the summer. One of the things, I'm going to go backwards here for a second, and I have the rare opportunity to slightly correct David Manning. In all of this modeling, one of the things that was included was an assumption that there would be 8,000 acre-feet stored somewhere upstream of Lake Mendocino. So all of these numbers, for example, what are shown here, this assumes that there is some storage upstream somewhere. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Lake Mendocino's expansion, which Eric's going to talk about in a second, is great for downstream, and it's okay if you're pumping back upstream. But if there's a gravity solution further upstream, that's what we want to look at. So the concepts that are out there, all of these have been studied at some level. And so it says concept study completed. Let's be clear about what a concept study is. It's a little more than a cartoon drawing, but really not a lot. So this is not so it's usually a concept study, feasibility study, then 10%, 30%, 60, 90, 100% design. So we're very early on. That doesn't mean that there hasn't been something like $1 million spent on studying these options, but they're complicated. There's a lot of moving parts to them, and so there's a lot of effort. But unfortunately, we don't have answers. We have some clear ideas about how to move forward. And again, we'll talk about the pros and cons in just a minute. So Army Corps of Engineers study for raising Lake Mendocino. Eric's going to go into some detail. We've looked at tributary storage up around Potter Valley, inside Potter Valley. Another storage option of on-stream storage in Potter Valley. There's some in-valley pond storage, and if you've been up and down there driving at 25 miles an hour so you don't rip your shocks out, you will have seen ponds all over, and you'll understand that. Conjunctive use, which is another way of saying groundwater pumping, and then finally pump back from Lake Mendocino, basically a pump station in Lake Mendocino that would push water back up the hill to all of the users along the way and then up in Potter Valley. So, Eric, I'm going to hand over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Eric Nagy. I'm also a consultant like Tom to IWPC, and in a lot of ways, I'm the new kid on the block. I've only been involved with the project for 2 years, not 5 or 20 or 30 like some folks. And unlike Tom, who has 40 years of experience with PG&E, which is a big part of why they hired him 5 or 6 years ago, They hired me 2 years ago because I've got 30 years of experience with the Army Corps of Engineers, including 13 years as an Army Corps of Engineers employee. I'm a civil engineer, and I was hired by IWPC to help navigate a water storage study at Lake Mendocino. It's a Coyote Valley Dam general investigation study, if you look for it online. And what I wanted to do today is just spend a few minutes talking a little bit about the Army Corps' project delivery process and where we are with the study. I don't think it's a surprise to anybody to hear that when you try to capture federal money, that federal money comes with strings. And the strings that come with it, one of the strings is that it takes some time. It takes a lot of time to get a federal interest decision that allows for the federal investment to happen in a major capital improvement project like one that we would hope to see at Coyote Valley Dam. The Corps of Engineers process is very traditional in that you go through the planning process like Tom started to describe. Once you go through that planning process, there's a stop where the Corps asks Congress to approve their recommendation, and that's a really important step in the Army Corps' process that a lot of people don't key in on or understand. The Corps doesn't study something and then decide what to invest in. The Corps studies something, they make a recommendation to Congress, Congress approves the investment, and then Congress starts appropriating funds for that investment to be designed and constructed. And so the feasibility study process, as you could imagine, is a really critical part because it's all the work that the Corps is doing in conjunction with a non-federal sponsor, which they have to have by law. It's all the work that they're doing to make the case for that federal interest and that federal investment. In the case of this study at Lake Mendocino, that non-federal sponsor is the Inland Water and Power Commission, along with another non-federal sponsor, the Lytton Tribe. And so where we are is just at the very beginning, the very left side of that first blue square. The Inland Water and Power Commission signed a cost-sharing agreement with the Army Corps of Engineers earlier this year, and that essentially kicks off a 3 to 5 year feasibility study where you look at options at Lake Mendocino for increasing the ability to store water. And so as you kind of look through the progress, we've actually made a tremendous amount of progress this year, in spite of the fact that we endured the longest federal government shutdown in the federal government's history, and in spite of the fact that we haven't yet identified additional federal appropriations to apply to the study. What we were able to do was to use federal funding that we received or that the Corps received in fiscal year 24 to get the study going. But really, in order to continue the study, it requires annual allocation of federal appropriations along with matching non-federal funds. We haven't gotten to the point where we need to apply non-federal funding to continue the study yet. Primarily because Lytton and the Lytton Tribe's participation allows for a credit that doesn't require non-federal investment right away, so that's a real benefit of having them as a project partner. But without question, the ability to continue the study it requires the allocation of additional federal funds. And I think one thing that I'd like to say while I'm up here is, unlike I think the experience that many have with either state or federal funding partners, the Corps does function a little differently. They're not a granting agency. When the Corps receives funding for your study or project, that's not a grant that they're going to then turn around and provide to you to spend for that project. That's the funding that they use to fund their own staff to work on advancing a study or a design or construction of a project. And so that's really what we're doing in this case, is we're working with the Army Corps' engineers and scientists and all the folks that are so familiar with that type of infrastructure, like the system of dams that we have in California, and working with them to look at these different alternatives for how we can capture more water and store more water at Lake Mendocino. So the pros and cons, again, I don't know that there's any tremendous insight here, right? I mean, the pro is if you are involving a federal agency like the Corps, there's the opportunity to have a really powerful funding partner in the federal government, and you can attract those federal funds if they could determine that investment is in the federal interest. But the con of that, or one of the strings attached to that funding, if you will, is you do lose some control, right? You're not in a position where you're leading the project, you're a partner in the project, and sometimes you don't even maybe feel so much like a partner. You're just a participant in the process. And so there's a trade-off there, but I think when we're talking about something as significant as potentially a raise to a federal facility, then you have to understand that the partnership is about the best you could get. It's infeasible to think as a local agency that you're going to be able to do that type of project by yourself, and it's far more efficient, frankly, to do that in conjunction with the federal government at an existing federal facility as opposed to not. So. And I think with that, that kind of is the end of the Army Corps part. I'm going to turn it back over to Tom, and he's going to walk through the other 5 options that were on that water supply chart.
So me again, I'm going to go through these next 5 alternatives fairly quickly and steadily, and then what we'll do is have a little bit of question and answer at the end. I've already seen some sort of body language reactions, and I know there's going to be a couple of people who go, not that one. So just hang on to it. Let me go through all of them, and then we'll talk about it a little more afterwards. So as I mentioned, there have been studies and a lot of money spent on this. The first round of studies was in 2020 and 21. As part of the earlier feasibility studies when we were selecting the NERF as the alternative on the eel. And then more recently, there was another 1.5 or 2 years of studies that was just finished up in 2025. And all of these options are identified. I believe all of these documents are on the ERPA website. David says yes. And so you can download them. There's quite a bit of material there. Feel free to take a look. I'm just going to go through these in order and talk a little bit about them, and then we'll talk a little bit about the pros and cons. So the first and maybe most obvious of the storage alternatives is, what if we put a storage reservoir in Potter Valley? There's a couple of pretty good sized tributaries, in particular Bush and Boys Creek are pretty good size. There's a number of other ones as well. Sorry, I can't turn that way. Both McMillan and Jacobs looked at a number of different alternatives. There's quite a bit of ranking material in the report that sort of looks at them by size and determines how they might work. There was some simulation of how much water they could hold and so forth. The cost estimates are pretty rough. I mentioned earlier that this is a concept level study. There was not a detailed cost estimate for each one of those tributary alternatives, and they vary quite a bit, different geology, different location, different dam height, et cetera, and so forth. So the cost range was 125 to 250 million. Let me say one other thing. I think I may need a new microphone. Let me say something else about early phase cost estimates. This looks like a huge range. It's 100% sure enough. But typically in civil engineering, if you say the cost is going to be this, minus 50 plus 75, right? So it's a range just because you haven't done a detailed design. It's like saying I want to buy a car. Well, That's 30 to 130, right? It's a big range until you decide how many doors and how big it's going to be. Same idea here. So these ranges are really, really broad. The reality is somewhere in the middle. It depends on which option you pick. So the pros on this one, if the reservoir is high up in the valley, it could potentially be pressure filled. In other words, earlier we talked about the pumping at NERF. So the pumping at NERF, you're pumping from this floor into the bed of a pickup truck on the roof, right? It's about 25 feet. On the other side, it's 400 feet coming down into the valley. So you have a lot of pressure there to work with, and you could pressure fill one of these reservoirs. That's a pro. It could be big enough, depending on its size, to be more than just what's needed in Potter Valley. It could also be supplemental storage for Potter Valley down to Lake Mendocino and even below Lake Mendocino, depending on which one was picked. And so this is also supplemental. So whatever happens with the Army Corps of Engineers study, whether that's a go or a no-go, this could move on its own schedule. This could be built separately. The cons, obviously, it's going to be fairly expensive. You can get that from the rough numbers. And then it's also going to be complicated. So permitting of an above-ground storage structure for water in California is difficult, take a lot of years, a lot of studies, a lot of engineering work and so forth. There's also a question around water rights. Right now, there's no appropriative water rights in the valley, not very many, and this would be a whole new big new water right issue. Let me move on to the next one. This is also an in-valley storage option. It was evaluated, and it basically amounts to putting a dam at the lower end of the valley, right? The valley has a pretty good slope all the way from Potter Valley Project Powerhouse at the upper end down to the road out to Highway 20. Jacobs looked at fairly low height dams, 20, 30, and 40 feet. And the storage amounts are reasonably large. The 40-foot had almost over 19,000 acre-feet of storage. Costs are in the realm of the tributary storage, 115 to 220 million cost range. Now on the pros side, it's gravity fill. The water comes in at Potter Valley Powerhouse, flows down the valley, and then backs up. Could also be larger than is needed in Potter Valley, and it would also be supplemental to Lake Mendocino. The cons, there's a big one, like if you live at the bottom end of the valley, it's not necessarily your first choice. It's probably expensive. Again, it's going to be complicated to permit and build. I will say this for our engineering firms, they looked at everything. Right? Whether good, bad, or indifferent, that wasn't their decision. They wanted to give us all the options. The third one is Potter Valley Pond Storage. You all are familiar with the frost protection ponds in Potter Valley. There's roughly 125 acres worth of those ponds. They are typically, I don't think they're all exactly the same, they're typically about 10 feet tall. They typically hold about 8 feet of water. They're anywhere from an acre, half an acre, up to maybe a few acres in size. So if we needed to have another 5,000, or total of 5,000 acre feet of pond storage, there's currently 125 acres. That means there needs to be another 500-ish acres dedicated to these shallow ponds. They could be concentrated in a location. They could be spread out around the valley, depending on where the needs were. There's multiple ways to do it, but that's the requirement to make sufficient storage. Costs, this is a little bit cheaper. We're talking $15 to $29 million, rough costs. Some of the pros, a little bit different. This is scalable, right? You could build 100 acres of ponds. You could build 500 acres. You could build 40 acres or whatever you needed to. It could be done phased. It could be done a little now, more in the future, and so forth. It could be sized for PVID only, PVID plus downstream. You could have collective land. Everybody goes in, you buy some acreage. That's the pond, serves everybody. People could put it on their individual parcel. A lot of flexibility. Obviously, on the cons, land utilization, there's roughly 5,000 arable acres in Potter Valley, 500 acres, that's 10%. That's a bit of a bite. And so the land usability, not all land may be perfectly suitable. It's got to have fairly low permeability or else lining and so on and so forth. And then how to manage it. In other words, if you put the water here and it needs to go there, if you don't distribute the ponds right, there's some complexities in how you tie it all together and manage it in a way that has benefit around the valley. Conjunctive use is a euphemism for groundwater storage. There is some potential for groundwater storage and use in Potter Valley. Jacobs did a fair amount of assessment work, but this one's a little complicated. It's all below ground, obviously. They need to drill more test wells to have a better look. The current guesstimate is that there's about 3,500 acres per year of potential yield. That could be plus or minus, could be more than that, could be a little bit less than that, but there would need to be some additional assessment before that was known for sure. Jacob's concept, again, concept was it's distributed well field all over the valley, 124 total wells. Once again, in a refined design, you decide, do you need that many, fewer, concentrated, spread out? They did not look downstream. So if there were opportunities in Ukiah Valley or elsewhere downstream of Potter Valley, those have not yet been assessed, at least not in this study. Costs, again, a little better in the $19 to $22 million range, plus the cost of whatever piping to tie it all together. It is, again, scalable and can be built through time. It's, again, supplemental to Lake Mendocino. There is a lot of work to do to prove this out. I mentioned this once, I'll say it again. There needs to be more testing, more wells dug, monitoring wells, and at least a couple of production wells. In general, in Potter Valley, I think most of the wells are domestic. There aren't very many large production ag wells. And so it would take some work to sort this out. Depending on what the geology and subsurface conditions are, it may only yield about 3,500 acre feet per year. Probably not enough for Potter Valley, and certainly not supplemental for additional downstream uses. Pump back from Lake Mendocino, this idea has been around for a while. It was originally looked at back in 2020. It is a roughly 10-mile pipeline, depending on from Lake Mendocino where it's going up into Potter Valley. You can size it for whatever you want. It could be big enough to do 10,000 acre feet a year or plenty of water for Potter Valley. There's a big problem. The current storage in Lake Mendocino is fully subscribed. What I mean by that is there are water rights holders who have all of the storage rights. So unless there's a dam raise, or unless there's some kind of a contractual or other arrangement with the people who already hold those water rights, there isn't any water to pump. This is going to be an expensive project, over $100 million. That doesn't include operations, and obviously, unlike the NERF with a lift of 25 feet, this is a lift of 200 or 300 feet, so it's going to be a little more expensive to pump. It could meet full demand, so it's scalable up to be full size. As I mentioned, there's problems with water rights as one of the big ones, and any costs associated with expanding Lake Mendocino. It's a little bit tough. For all of these projects, particularly in Potter Valley, but likely for other places in Mendocino County as well, some kind of conservation is going to be necessary. On-farm demand management, which means basically figuring out how to do the same work with less water, so things like drip irrigation. Probably not going to see much in the way of open ditches in Potter Valley or further downstream. and water delivery efficiency is going to be necessary. These things are all going to need to happen because water will get a lot more expensive. I think you've talked about that in other meetings. The cost estimate for this, let's say $10 million, but that's spread unequally around, depending on what crops are grown and what farms. There could be some very differential costs, whether this is paid by individual farmers or whether some sort of collective effort. There may or may not be grant money for this, and certainly the cost would not be spread evenly. Depends on where you are and what sort of crops you might have. That's what I've got on storage. Just a really quick run through. I'm going to take just a moment and see if there's any questions either on the core study or any of these storage alternatives. Okay.
If you go the conjunctive use direction, what happens when you pump all that water out of the groundwater basin? What happens to the domestic wells, like all along Main Street? Historically, those wells have not needed to be very deep. Lots of people have wells as shallow as 15 feet, and some of them went dry this summer, right after the flow was cut down to 5 CFS. That's my neighbor that happened to her.
Yeah, that's a good question. It should be deeper than 15 or you're subject to the impact of surface things coming into your water supply. When I said more study, that's exactly what I mean, because there are shallow wells all around. There are consumptive use wells sprinkled throughout the valley, and understanding how the underground system is all networked. Pumping over here, will it affect over there? It's unknown. We just don't have that level of detail. So that's part of the additional study work that would need to be done. On the plus side, all of the Jacobs analysis showed that Potter Valley is a pretty rich watershed. So everything that flows into the valley from all the way around, it would completely refill the groundwater every year, even without the Potter Valley project, which introduces an interesting concept. Can we have conjunctive use and not need to pay for the NERF pumping? I don't know. That's a question for the future, but yeah, more study needs to be done.
It seems like all that needs to be done and the permits need to be left before PG&E takes out Scott Dam and the diversion stops.
That is an excellent point that we were actually going to get to, I think, in the next slide. And what she said was, if you couldn't hear it, is we need to figure this out. I'm going to paraphrase for you if that's okay. We need to figure out storage upstream of Lake Mendocino before Scott Dam goes away and before we start having winter water and nothing to use in the summer. That's exactly right. So we don't have schedule slides tonight. That's for the next time we're going to do a workshop to try and think about when Scott Dam, when the FERC order might come, when Scott Dam might come out, and working backwards from that, where should we be now, we, IWPC and its constituents, where should we be now? What should we be doing in the next couple of years to get ready for that eventuality? That's not something we're prepared to talk about tonight, but that needs to be at the next meeting.
So in the storage options pursued, such as the tributary storage, would these be under landowner control or under one of the districts? And would property owners have personal gain if the storage was on their property?
That is a great question and way beyond the level of detail of design or permitting or concepts. I mean, that's a great question. I'm not saying that I just don't have an answer. That has not been figured out. I think IWPC decides to pursue one or another of these different storage options. Those are exactly this kind of questions that need to be answered. Is this a collective investment? Is it an individual investment? What are the designs? What are the costs? What grant money, what federal money might be available to support this effort?
I agree with what Tom said, but there's a little bit of framework I can at least give, which is there are California constitutional provisions that do create a framework around how money can be used. And those provisions basically provide that if you are paying for a service, you have to get a benefit that's basically proportionate to how much you're paying. And if you're not paying, then you don't get that benefit. And so while Tom is absolutely right, we're not to the point yet to be able to answer specifically. I can answer that the California Constitution makes sure that Tom isn't paying for storage that Eric is the one getting the benefit of. And so that's the legal restriction that applies before you get to the engineering and public agency decision-making about how it happens.
This may be way outside the purview of what you were talking about. The first question was there any, and I totally understand why this isn't processed now. It's helped me understand it. Was there any going to federal agencies or state agencies to look at the dam at Lake Pillsbury, or take over that dam for water storage versus having to try to do all these alternatives? And then the second question, is there anything above Pillsbury that could meet some of these requirements that would not have the controversy with the fisheries, but provide the storage that you need, or Cow Mountain?
To my knowledge, the dam owner in California is typically Department of Water Resources. And the owner of dams in California that are owned by the state is Department of Water Resources. So if there was a state entity that was going to take over Lake Pillsbury, it would probably be DWR. And to my knowledge, they have no interest in taking over a 100-year-old failing dam.
The Department of Water Resources says at their website that Lake Pillsbury is in good shape for future use.
The Department of Water Resources says on their website that Lake Pillsbury is in good shape for future use. I haven't verified that. I'm just repeating what you said.
So you also asked about federal. At the federal level, the agency that owns water resource projects tends to be the Bureau of Reclamation. And the Bureau of Reclamation, under federal law, can own a dam. Also under federal law, if the Bureau of Reclamation owns a federal dam, the water users pay 100% of the costs. They pay for the cost of fixing the dam, capitalizing, purchasing the dam, operation and maintenance of the dam. And so going to the federal government doesn't get you any particular funding. It just is another entity that can own it. I'm unfamiliar with the reference that you're providing on DWR. I'd love to, after the meeting, maybe you can show me where that is.
Go to the website.
Well, after the meeting, because they have a big website, but I've also seen documents on their website where they agree with PG&E that the dam is safe and secure if it is kept empty. Right? And so that's why I'd love to talk with you afterwards. I have a laptop here. You and I can get on the website together and we can take a look, but happy to have that conversation with you afterwards.
So my question is about your comment about collaboration in some of these solutions. And getting back to this Lake Pillsbury Dam situation, have you done a cost analysis with sitting down with Lake County, who is the second poorest county in California? So expecting something grand from them is unrealistic, but it is in Lake County that Lake Pillsbury exists, and gone over what the cost to retrofit would actually be. And PG&E is passing the cost of the decommissioning on to the ratepayers, so we have to pay anyway. Wouldn't it be more prudent to do a cost analysis on retrofitting Lake Pillsbury, the Scotts Dam, actually bringing in more government agencies to watch over something like that and help support something like that, and less trucks, less everything in retrofitting versus taking things down? It's not just Potter Valley's roads. Lake County's roads are even worse. So the reality of the situation is there seems to be another option that has yet to be explored, and I'm wondering if you could explore it. Thank you.
I'm going to do my best to answer, and I will apologize in advance that I believe you will find my answer unsatisfying. And I want to say that up front because I want you to know it's not that I'm not hearing you, it's just that I'm in a different place at this point. I hear your comment, and I think abstractly, yes, like, why is that not happening? I get that completely. And the best answer I can give is that was a time that has already passed. We raised our hand about acquiring the project by auction, and then that opportunity went away. We raised our hand about relicensing, and we couldn't raise the money to even do the studies to find out what the impacts of relicensing would be with our partners. And so that moment has passed, and at this point, for this agency, for IWPC, not speaking for everybody, but for IWPC, we have made a decision that the process has reached a point that legally there are no other off-ramps, that we need to support and not prevent the dam from being removed in order to guarantee future diversions, which is what the water diversion agreement says, and that's where our focus is. And we understand completely if you're looking at it from a pure economic perspective and saying, I don't understand, if you're going to spend all this money here, why aren't you spending it there? And the best I can come up with is a really bad analogy, which is if I look at my roof and my roof isn't in good shape and my neighbor's is in a little bit better shape, me spending the money on my neighbor's roof isn't legally an option. It's not my house, that's their house. I need to solve within the constraints that I have. And so I don't want you to feel like I'm blowing off your question, I'm not. We've just been down that road, we have explored, we have tried, we got to the point where this was our best option, that's where we are now. And we understand if other people are still trying to explore Lake Pillsbury, that's not where we are right now.
Oh, thank you. Mahim Sintamana Kekanema, Nicole Ana, Round Valley Ke'ana. My name is Nicole Whipple, and I'm a member of the Round Valley Indian Tribes, and I also live in Lakeport, constituent of Lake County. And I just, wanted to make a comment. Thank you for all of your information. But the reality, and thank you for really pointing out that, we've kind of, the time has already sunset. We're at the last hours of moving forward. And I think it's really important to understand that, as a person who resides in Lake County, I'm very well aware, if we're talking about economically, that the reason why Lake County is so poor is because of all the exports that are already happening. So to save the dam, to save ag and whatever's happening in Lake County that already can't suffice the county, it doesn't make sense to put more money into saving the dam when the problem is the fact that Lake County has a lot of resources that are being outsourced into other counties. So I just wanted to put that out there as well on the topic of economics.
Can you talk more about flooding $5? Whose homes go underwater and what farms get flooded and
what percentage of the valley goes missing in either one of those two scenarios? And then when you're talking about the wells, building all those wells, how deep are they going to be? We have a really high groundwater table from all the water that we do have, and zero water coming through the diversion in the summer months. Is that 5 months or 7 months or 3 months? There's not going to be any water to talk about. Can you tell us what that looks like?
Yeah, I'll try and do those in order. So this graphic that's up here now shows the rough take for a 20, a 30, and a 40-foot dam height. I have driven all over the valley, but I don't know who owns what here, and so I couldn't tell you exactly how many acres that is. And yeah, it does say. So this one, 62 acres for the smallest. That's this white one here. 280 acres for the medium and 640 for a 40-foot dam, and that would be the maximum. And again, this was the engineers being thorough. It wasn't necessarily an endorsement or this is a great plan or what have you. But if you're an engineer, you say you put the dam at the bottom of the valley, make it as low as you can. It's easier to permit and so forth. So they were just doing their due diligence. The third question that I recall, and you'll have to tell me the second one again, was how many months of dry are there in the summer? So in the modeling that David alluded to earlier, it depends on the year type. So in the very driest year types, this actually isn't a bad proxy for it. If I can get there. There we go. In the very driest year types, so, and I apologize folks over there, I can only point at one screen. In the very driest year types, this is February, this is April, so this is a period of about, let's say, 3.5 to 4 months. In an average year, this is February, and we go out into mid-June, maybe even the 1st of July. And then in a wet year type, we had flows coming across as early as December and going out well into July. So depending on the year type, dry season could be 4 months or it could be 8 months, right? It's just year by year.
So summer has a big definition when we're talking about water.
Right.
No water. There's no reason for a dam downstream or pumping water to Potter Valley if there's no water.
Why don't you talk into the mic? We can't hear you.
There's no reason for having raising up Lake Mendocino or putting in elaborate pump systems to pump water if 8 months out of the year you don't have any water coming down to even collect to pump back up.
Well, so let's dig into that just a second. So if you look at the inflow to Lake Pillsbury in a dry year, in let's say 2014, what do you think the inflow to Lake Pillsbury is in July or August? 5, 8, 3, not very much. So the only reason there's water in the summertime is because it's already in storage and they're drafting the reservoir down. We need to build our storage, fill it up when the water's there so we can draft down during those dry summer months.
Should we build it right below Scott's Dam and then just keep all the infrastructure we already have?
I mean, PG&E didn't see an economically viable way to either rebuild Scott Dam, to rebuild Scott Dam.
Why does PG&E get to decide what happens to that dam? If
'Cause
they
they
don't
own
want it.
They own it.
But do they? They just said that you could either have the Bureau of Reclamation or the Department of Water Resources own it.
I mean, in theory, those entities would have, I don't want to pretend to be a lawyer, would have the legal ability to own something. I mean, they could potentially, for some reason, come and condemn this building if they wanted to own it, but that's different from them having a reason or a economic interest in doing so. The value of the water. So in Scott, going back to what Scott says about the Bureau of Reclamation, yes, if they could come and take it and own it and pass the cost through. What do you think the costs of refurbishing Scott Dam to the tune of, pick a number, 50 million, 100 million, and then operating at $5 to $7 million per year and passing those costs along?
It can't be any more than what we're talking about in all these other scenarios.
So let me just answer one piece that you asked about, which was, well, why could we build another dam below Scott Dam? And I'll just note this dam was constructed 100 years ago, before any of the current environmental permitting statutes existed on a state and federal level. And I was just whispering with the panelists here, we can't remember the last dam that was constructed on stream in California. It certainly wasn't this century. I don't know if it was in the 70s or 80s, but even starting when they constructed San Luis, which was what, the 80s, that wasn't even on stream. That was constructed in a dry area. The current statutory scheme just doesn't support constructing on a river. And the final thing I want to say is that the purpose of this workshop is to talk about the storage options we're exploring and to get feedback on them. And it's not that we're not hearing you, it's just that we've concluded that's not a viable, legal, financial path, and that's why we don't have it up here as an option. And so I want to make sure you know you're being heard. It's just, we've already moved past that as a viable option, and so I think we should focus on the ones here, recognizing that we have heard your comment.
So of those 6 viable options, I mean, you said you had to show us some of them that are just ludicrous, like flooding the bottom half of Potter Valley. What of those 6 are actually viable? Pumping 10 miles of water back upstream, not viable. Flooding the bottom half of Potter Valley, not viable. Building 125 wells, how deep? 300 feet, 200 feet, 100 feet?
So,
Viable options.
at the risk of having a lawyer answer engineering viability questions, which we can all make fun of, I will note that a pump back is viable. It's basically equivalent to the purple pipe system that Ukiah just constructed in terms of cost, sheer volume of pipe, rough distance of pipe. That's a project that many people thought the city of Ukiah could never have constructed, but it did. And so that is an example that if that's the option, it is technologically, financially, and politically viable, and we have an example locally where it's been done. On the tributary storage, a lot of that land is not in irrigation. Right? It is higher up in the tributaries. And so you may not be displacing as many people or as much irrigation. Most of the dams that are in California were constructed on very beautiful agricultural soil because that's where the river ran through. And we just haven't had one of these in a long time. But people were displaced. To go to the young woman's point, whole nations were displaced. And I'm not advocating displacing anyone. I'm saying it is a political, financial decision that ultimately has to be made. In terms of the groundwater, again, I'm the least qualified person to speak to it, but the 3,500 acre foot number was selected because it was determined that that's basically the amount that's replenished every year, such that you wouldn't be drawing down the groundwater basin. Now the technological questions are more, where do you put the wells, how deep they have to be, and that's what the next stage would be. So I don't think Tom is saying any of these can't be done. He's saying don't take him presenting them as an indication that the IWPC board has endorsed them. And that gets to the next question, which is the one that's on the slide here, which is what is our process? How are we going to decide those things? And that's exactly why we were so pleased to be able to add this topic into the workshop that IWPC and the county wanted to do, which was to start talking about storage. So we're not just talking about our process, but actual solutions. And so Tom, I think, is going to present a little bit of what some of the consultants' initial thinking is, not the boards, the consultants. And then we're going to have IWPC board meetings where we're going to talk with the board about these things. And I hope many of you will attend those meetings and share your thoughts on these options, because we need to get input and we need to start making some decisions on what we explore in more depth.
Yeah, I think Scott covered a little bit of this, and I've said several times, I'll say again, these are all concept level designs. Additional investigation is needed. However, we already have money to invest in the core study. We have 5 different alternatives plus some efficiency upgrades that we could pursue. There isn't endless money, so we probably should prioritize what it is we're going to study. Another thing that I mentioned earlier, in hopefully our next workshop, we'll be able to talk a little more about schedule and working backwards from when, as whoever it was pointed out, we should probably have something in the way of storage figured out before Scott Dam goes offline. What does that mean? How much time do we have? How soon do we need to get going on these things? And so what's here is just an example of what a viable path might be. So is there some benefit for tributary storage? Scott mentioned a couple of benefits. It's not on valley bottom land. You can build it to different sizes, so you could potentially optimize. Maybe that's something that we continue to consider and put some money towards studying at the next level. Eric was talking earlier about the Corps of Engineers study. Assuming the Corps gets back up to speed, gets their mojo back after the shutdown, and they can resume. We're already engaged with that. Let's move forward and see where that leads, at least for some months, if not for a few years. And then maybe a pond storage plus conjunctive use, not necessarily because they're the best, but because you always want to have a fallback. If the Corps doesn't come through, if that doesn't pan out, if tributary storage is too expensive, what are you left with? So some version of conjunctive use and pond storage, maybe that's something that can be made to work if it's done right. So, you know, just as someone who does not live in Potter Valley but is a frequent visitor, I just look at the alternatives. I hear what a couple of you said or said with your body language. Flooding the valley? Maybe not. So let's pick some things that we think might have some wheels and decide what to take forward. All right, I think we're back to Q&A.
And for the folks who are online, we'll do about 10 or 15 minutes worth of questions, and then we'll take a break in the room so folks who are online get a chance, and we'll have Candace manage that. And then we'll come back to the room again. And then just 2 other quick comments for those of you who were interested in seeing the boards that David brought that show the before and after of the dam. He'll do that at the end for anyone who would like to meet with him. And then Janet Pauly is running a whole seminar on how you comment on the variance, and that'll also be at the end. And we take that seriously. Like, we want people to comment on that. So please don't just leave. Come and talk to her. She's interested in that topic.
So I have a question related to climate, and I won't frame it in terms of climate change for those who see this as a sunspot phenomenon. That's okay. For those who believe that climate change is real and is happening, that's okay. But historically or prehistorically, my understanding is that the state of California has long-term drought and monsoon cycles. That in my early 30s, there was evidence from CAL FIRE that there were fires that lasted multi-years during 10-year drought cycles, 10 to 20-year drought cycles. Is there any provision in this for the fact that both the Eel and the Russian River are subject to the same drought cycles no matter what you do? And have you looked at a 3, 5, or, a 20-year? I hope not. But have you looked at long drought cycles at what your management strategies are and what you're doing with this?
I think Don has been sitting here for 2 hours hoping someone would ask a question that he can speak to, and this is probably number 1 on his list.
So the results that have been shown today have been historical data sets dating back to 1910 to 2024. Sonoma Water is working with a consultant and is about to finalize a climate futures data set that we will run all our models on the results you saw today with historical, looking at what climate futures out to 2100 would look like. So yes, that is in the process and will probably be completed in the next 4 to 6 months. So, you know, in that data set of 1910 to 2024, there are some significant droughts that are represented. Droughts that occurred in the late 20s into the 30s, 5-year droughts, droughts that occurred the 76, 77, also the 20 through 22. So there are some very significant events that have occurred. We haven't created any artificial data sets, like trying to tag on what it would have looked like if 77 had been followed by 21, 22. We're hoping to see some of that in the climate future data sets. Actually, hoping not to see something like that in the climate future data sets.
And just 2 additional comments on that, and then there's a woman up here who has a question next. One is that your question is one of the reasons that conjunctive use remains on the board, because groundwater usage during a deep drought is an option. And the second is, this is why IWPC started the Lake Mendocino study years ago, before there was even a question of whether the Potter Valley project might go through decommissioning by PG&E. Right? What year was that first?
2005.
In 2005. This was, you know, the mess we're talking about today wasn't even a glimmer in anyone's eye. But IWPC said we need greater storage for just the reason you identified. Whether you think climate change is happening or not, there are periods of dry. And that's exactly why we need more storage, even separate from what we're talking about here.
What's the historic high flows in the Russian from the diversion? So like maximum past diversion. And then how is the 300 CFS going to affect the Russian in high flows already when we already are flooding in the wintertime? So we're trying to get, sure, that's when we can divert, but we're already flooded. How are you going to flood us more?
I'm going to hand it off to one of these 3 gentlemen who all look interested in answering. But I will note that we're not going to pump water out of the eel at a time that it's going to flood people, because we would only spend the money to pump it if we had a place to store it. But then on the detail of that, sounds like, Don, you've been nominated again.
Well, actually, Scott just answered the question. I mean, if you recall that one, the slides that David showed when the project would operate, there was that big block in the winter where it was not operating. That's because there was no storage. And any releases coming out of Lake Mendocino were flood control releases from natural flow coming into the reservoir. So this project wouldn't contribute to any type of downstream flooding in the Russian.
So what's the maximum that it used to regularly divert? Was it 300?
300 CFS was the maximum. Yeah. And so that's a drop in the...
It's a disaster right now. All the check dams in it are a mess. There's been no maintenance on it. Then you're going to do this more regularly. I mean, I understand you're not there yet, but that's a consideration. Definitely the maintenance of the Russian through Potter Valley is bad right now and only going to get worse.
I think there's a legal question. So PG&E is going to have to do an EIS, which is really an environmental impact report, and they're going to have to consider the impacts and mitigate the impacts on the fish, the natural habitat of the river and everything. But they also have to consider the impact on humans, and it seems like they should be required to do some mitigation, which what I'm getting at is money towards the fact that they are closing this diversion, and they have some responsibility for the impact of that.
So I'm going to generally agree with your concept. I want to correct a little bit of the detail. PG&E itself doesn't do an environmental impact report. It's not a government agency. The State Water Resources Control Board, which will be granting the water quality certification, will do the EIR. And they had a community meeting here in Ukiah within the last month, starting the scoping process for that. And so that's the first place in which you can engage and provide comments. At the federal level, NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, is the federal rough equivalent statute, and that will be done by FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And so that's the place at the federal level where those comments would be made. Now, NEPA is a procedural statute. It doesn't require mitigation. It only requires the disclosure of information. Federal agencies are not required to mitigate anything. They're required to tell the world what the consequences are and to make sure the decision makers understand those consequences when they make a decision. CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, does have mitigation requirements unless those mitigation requirements are found to be overridden, meaning the agency can decide we don't have to mitigate that, we're okay without doing it. And lots of examples of when that happens. You build a highway, it might have certain impacts, but everyone determines the highway still should happen, and so there's an override that occurs.
I've written many environmental assessments, and you are required to address mitigations in those.
But it doesn't mean you have to actually implement them.
It's using
It's a
federal money,
it's
where this PG&E isn't, I guess, using federal money. No, you need to address mitigations specifically.
on the federal level, there's no obligation to mitigate under the National Environmental Policy Act. There is under substantive environmental statutes, such as the Endangered Species Act, which doesn't protect humans. We're not endangered yet. Under the Clean Water Act, does not require mitigation of economic impacts on humans, for example. So I'm not invalidating your premise, which is this community may say, PG&E, we think you have an obligation to us. I'm just telling you the two statutes and what the constraints are, but I think your point is a political one.
Scott, this is a question for you as a lawyer. If you go back in time in Potter Valley, before the diversion was put in, it was possible to do dry land farming. After the diversion went in, then the water table cut way down, and the Thornton family brought a suit against PG&E that caused the creation of those check dams in order to prevent further lowering of the water table. And now they intend to remove the diversion, or for any responsibility for the diversion, which may very well have a tendency to lower the groundwater table. I really don't believe the evidence that's been presented that it won't, especially if you go around putting a whole bunch of big wells in there. So it seems to me that PG&E is legally liable for having caused the property damage that this will occur. In Potter Valley, there used to never be anything for sale. Right up and down Main Street, there's 4 or 5 signs right now. The property values are going to drop. Mendocino County's revenues are going to drop. And doesn't PG&E have some financial responsibility? If we bring a class action suit, we go around and we say to everybody, how much are you being hurt? What's it going to cost you? We'll add it all up, down from here to Guerneville, where the resorts won't have people coming to spend their money in the future. And add it all up, and maybe PG&E will decide that $5 or $10 million a year to keep this facility going is cheaper than dealing with that.
I want to make a joke and say I didn't hear it in the form of a question, but I don't want to minimize your point, right?
Well, the question is,
Yeah.
do you think there's a legal basis?
Okay. And my answer is going to be an unsatisfying, I don't know. I haven't read the decision you're talking about. I'm aware of it. I haven't read it. I know there's a lot of discussion going on right now about whether PG&E will have an ongoing obligation to maintain those check dams, and if not, whether someone else will. I also haven't seen any modeling yet on the impact it will have on the water source. All I can tell you is that if there is an impact, a lawyer will hopefully step forward to represent people to try to mitigate that impact. And I can't answer more specifically because I don't know the facts that underlie it. But I hear you and agree that those are the kinds of things that the law is good at providing protection for. And we'll do that one, and then this gentleman in the middle, and then we'll pause for folks online, just so that they can have a chance.
Hi, Scott. Yeah, someone request that PG&E cover an economic development analysis as part of the CEQA process, an economic impact analysis?
Yeah, so I want to first remind everyone what I said at the beginning. This is not in response to you, but just generally that PG&E is willing to come to these meetings and we will invite them so that no one has to pass messages through me. But it might be useful for someone at this table to talk a little bit about how PG&E now goes about developing its management plans, what the purpose of those are, and kind of how that engages as part of the FERC process, just so the questionnaire and others in the audience kind of understand what's going to happen through the FERC process on some of these analyses. Someone want to take that?
So in the surrender application, PG&E referenced a number of different management plans. So the surrender application was fairly large. I think it was 1,500 pages or something like that. I haven't read every page of it, but quite a bit. In a number of places, they didn't necessarily evaluate impacts. Instead, what they did was offer that they would put together a management plan to make sure that the impacts were, I don't know how to say it, modest, minimized, what have you, right? And there were a number of things that I can think of where they said that. Sediment impacts on the Eel River, that's a huge one. There were fisheries impacts and various other things. I think in total, there was perhaps 15 to 20 different management plans. 42, David corrects me and says 42 different management plans that are mentioned as forthcoming. In sidebar discussions with PG&E at a couple of meetings, they needed to get their application filed. They are only just now starting on the design of what Cape Horn Dam or Scott Dam removal will look like. So they don't have a design for those things yet. Once they've gotten 30 or 40 or 50% along with the design, then they'll be able to start developing the management plans of how they will mitigate for traffic, for example, or air issues or sediment release, because they don't even have a design yet for how they're going to remove Scott Dam, so therefore they don't know what the sediment release pattern will be, so they can't have a management plan yet. So sometime in the next maybe 2 years, and I agree with Scott, let's ask PG&E. I don't want to speak for them. Maybe within a year or two, they will start to have draft management plans, which will start to speak to how they intend to mitigate for the impacts of their dam removal. In parallel, David mentioned earlier that ERPA for NERF will be doing our own CEQA. We are further ahead in our design of NERF than PG&E with their design of dam removal. Our management plans will be forthcoming sooner, I don't know, in a year perhaps, something along those lines. And we'll start to be able to understand more about what potential impacts we have, our own construction on Valley roads, back to your example, and we'll be able to start to speak about those things. But we do not yet have draft management plans to be able to say this or that or the other is covered.
And I'll also add, and then we'll do the question for the gentleman in the center, that I think both sets of resolution considered by the Board of Supervisors requested this kind of analysis to occur. And so there seems to be unanimity among all 5 of your supervisors on the importance of this. And this is another thing you can comment on to FERC before December 1st at 2 p.m. Pacific time, which is please have PG&E do this analysis. Right? And I don't know if they're willing to or not, because we haven't asked that question, but you make a good point, and I think lots of people are making that point.
Thanks for taking my question. Yeah, again, the monetary value of the tourism that we've lost over the years at Lake Pillsbury has really come to light, especially since the gas station closed in Potter Valley. And so Part of that is, and my question to the Army Corps gentleman is, and I realize that obviously Lake Pills, I'm kind of past the part, I realize the dam is gone. I'm not sure what's going to happen with the campsites back there. I'm not sure if they're privately owned, what's going to happen with them. But my question is, at Lake Mendocino, we have lost a lot of revenue in Redwood Valley in and around Ukiah. There are, I believe, over 209 campsites on the east side that if the dam does get raised, that we would hope that there would be a provision to raise the road, because our dollars have already paid for those campsites and they're just sitting back there idle. And that is a lot of tax revenue that we have lost in and around Redwood Valley and in and around Ukiah. There are not nearly as many people traveling here to recreate because of what's going on right now. And so we would hope that that would be part of the mitigation, the economic impact that we're already feeling in and around Potter Valley, in and around Redwood Valley. And so that's a big deal why it would be a really good idea to have PG&E at this meeting.
Yeah, so I'll just speak to that directly. So in a scenario where the Army Corps looks at a raise, right, where the pool elevation, full pool elevation is changing, certainly relocations of all types are part of that evaluation, right? It's part of the sort of the economic analysis that plays into it, as well as understanding the total project cost. And so public right-of-way, right, whether they be local or other types of roads, recreation facilities, you know, that all becomes part of that impact analysis, if you will, and part of evaluating what that future project condition should look like. I will say the, you know, recreation facilities, because in this case they are Army Corps of Engineers campsites, right? You would generally want to find a partnership locally to make sure that sort of that recreational opportunity stays equivalent in the future, maybe even upgraded facilities. But yeah, I mean, that's usually all part of the calculus, if you will, as to figuring out what the total project cost is.
Timeline of raising the dam realistically, do you have ballpark?
The young lady asked what the timeline would be for potentially constructing a raise to Coyote Valley Dam. I threw away my Army Corps crystal ball a long time ago because it never worked right. I mean, I think realistically you're in decades, right? I mean, you're not on a 3 to 5 year window. I think the feasibility study would likely be on a 3 to 5 year window. Then you need congressional authorization. You need to design a dam raise, and even though Coyote Valley Dam was built anticipating a raise, you know, in the 60s or 50s, I guess it was, it would still be a tremendous design effort and then construction on top of that. So, I mean, I think realistically you're, you know, 15, 20 years out for a project that would be of that scope and scale.
Which is one of the reasons it's not by itself on that list of things we should explore, right? It's in conjunction with other things. So we're going to take a minute just to see if anyone online has questions. I'm sure we don't have a half an hour's worth. So if you have questions, just hang a minute, but I want to be fair to people who have been sitting for 2.5 hours. Candace, I should bring you the microphone.
When there was no water to pump through the tunnel, how will you keep water in the tunnel, which is critical to keep it from collapsing due to the timbers used in original construction? I know PG&E considers this critical to maintaining the tunnel.
Yeah, so what PG&E does now, if they are not actively moving water through the tunnel, is they close the butterfly valve, which is at the just below the downstream portal, and they have water in through the inlet. In other words, it's already backed up. Under the new design, there would be either stop logs or a gate at the upstream end. So you'd basically close the tunnel at both ends and keep it full of water.
Best case scenario under NERF diversion is 20% of past amounts and 40% when or if the dam is raised. Can you negotiate for better diversion terms or amounts? This isn't sufficient to supply water all the way to Hillsburg. Sonoma Water and State of California have both admitted to this, and it is undeniable.
So those percentages aren't accurate. I think what was referenced there are the percentages allowed above the floor, which is not the same as the storage that results in Lake Mendocino and then the releases downstream. So by maintaining the reliability of Lake Mendocino, albeit less water than in the recent past, but still enough to maintain more like the flows that we are accustomed to seeing recently, flowing down the main stem of the Russian River. Sonoma Water is responsible for maintaining the minimum in-stream flows according to state regulations. We have modeled what that looks like, and we can provide those flows for all the benefits of the uses of that water in the Russian River if we maintain that reliability in Lake Mendocino. The only way we maintain that reliability in Lake Mendocino is by implementing the new Eel Russian facility. Without it, a whole new set of rules would need to be in place to ensure, if there's no diversion, that the dam isn't drained, and all the expectations for the amount of water that can be delivered downstream would also change. So a substantial difference between the NERF and no NERF. So with the NERF in place, we will be able to provide for all of the uses of water in the Russian River in a way not unlike we do now, a very dramatic change if the NERF is never implemented and the Potter Valley project is decommissioned without any future diversion. I don't know, Dawn, if you want to expand on that at all? Okay.
Just one last question. If fish passage isn't possible or is too difficult, what is going to be done to divert the water and fish while the new facility is being built? Seems like we are building both.
So there's a little bit of, I think in part of that question is what happens while the dam is being removed and the new Eel Russian facility is being constructed. So that section of the river, it's 500 or 600 feet in length, is isolated, and the flow in the Eel River is bypassed around that construction zone. That bypass will carry the flow of the Eel River. It's too early to know. There's no design. PG&E will be designing that bypass. Whether that bypass accommodates fish passage or there will need to be some other arrangement to trap and move fish around that bypass. But the idea is to keep the Eel River flowing and to keep the water flowing into the Russian during that construction period. Here's that management plan again. PG&E will be producing an East Branch Russian River management plan that takes into account what happens when there's construction around the site of the existing diversion.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else online that has questions that Candace hasn't read? You can either type a question into the chat, or if it's too complicated to type, write a note to Candace and we can see if we can unmute you just for the question. Just want to make sure we're giving folks an ample opportunity. Okay, so Candace, let us know if that changes. Let's go back to the room.
Hi, my name is Kyle Farmer. I'm one of the people with lakefront property, temporarily lakefront property. I think it's interesting, right? We just heard that there hasn't been a dam on stream built since 1970 something, and now we've seen some pictures of some potential dams on stream, which really acknowledges something important, which is that Potter Valley is above the limits of anadromy. And we're in a unique position to be doing really cool experimental things. We think about the check dams, we think about some of the riprap that is failing in terms of these wonderful Potter Valley, Pothole Valley roads that we have. Is there anything that we can do in Potter Valley to really acknowledge how experimental we should be allowed to be? I don't know if, having a lawyer to ask the question to, I don't know if it's like a programmatic EIR or something that would allow some of these solutions to be happening now on the private side, that really deeply acknowledges the unique situation the Potter Valley is in, being above Lake Mendocino?
Let me start by asking David to just describe what the point of anadromy means for people in the room who might not know, so we're at least all caught up.
No salmon and steelhead can make it past Lake Mendocino, so there are no listed salmon and steelhead in Potter Valley currently.
I guess I could have said that. So I'm not sure how to answer your question, but my mind went to one place, and maybe I can start and then hand it to Tom, and then maybe we'll get to your answer, or you can rephrase it. But when you describe that, what I thought of is the kind of matrix analysis that's done when you have lists of options like this. Right? You create a matrix that has every option on the left and then a whole bunch of criteria along the top. And often it's a scale of 1 to 10, or a yes, no, or a red, yellow, green, or a hard, easy, right? And one of the columns would be something like, is this permittable? Could you get a permit for it? And then you have a debate about that. And so actually, probably everybody up here has done this, but does someone want to talk a little bit about like how that process would work with this range of options a little bit? And maybe that starts to get to your point. So, no one's moving. Do I have to pay one of you to take the microphone?
Well, the Jacobs report that Tom was referencing, that studied a lot of these options, went through the process that Scott was describing. It listed like 10 or 12 different, permitting, complexity of permitting, complexity of financing, complexity of the engineering, complexity of, environmental issues. And if you go to that report, you can, you can go to that section, you can see where they did that scoring of each of those options that was described, that tributary. But I completely agree with you. You are in that unique situation of not having steelhead and salmon in your watershed.
And to go back to the comment, I believe it was from over here, where the woman was talking about, well, can we build something on the Eel River? Like, this is a great contrast, which is there are fish there aren't fish here above Lake Mendocino. So if you're going to examine locations, examining it in the area with more easy permitting is one of the reasons why we're not exploring things over there. We're exploring it where it's more likely to be able to occur.
Again, I want to go back to the question of funding the project. So we have a Sonoma County water man here, we have the design man here. I want to know where the funding, you've got funding for studies. I want to know the probability, or do you have funding in hand? Sonoma County's 10 times bigger than Mendocino County in population. Is there funding through Sonoma County to build this project? Without funding, all of this meeting is worthless. I mean, we're here because we got to get a project done, and there's a window that it has to be done. What's the probability that the funding's going to be there?
So you are correct that there is money right now for the planning and the design. We've received actually quite a bit of money, and will be receiving quite a bit of money. I'll just review that really quick. About $2 million from the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation for the current 60% design. The state of California has pledged $9 million for the next phases of environmental compliance and design. There's a line item in Proposition 4 for the Coastal Conservancy to provide funding for this effort. That money is not yet available, but it was made available through the governor's budget. That will come online in a few years. We were awarded through the Department of the Interior, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, $15 million to help with multiple aspects of the project. That money has been frozen by the federal government. We were doing everything we can to dislodge that money. Some of those monies could be used for capital costs, for building the new Eel Russian facility. But there is another round of work that needs to happen at both the federal and state level. And there's a revenue study, a revenue strategy study that we are initiating very soon. within the next month or two to look at the options for folks that benefit from that diversion and having that water either flow through Potter Valley, stored in Lake Mendocino, released into the Russian in Mendocino County and Sonoma County. The benefits the entire community derives from the reliability in Lake Mendocino through the new Eel Russian facility. So it will not be Sonoma County or Sonoma County Water Agency alone that pays for the new Eel Russian facility. It will be users of that water, potentially even users of the Russian River and its benefits at large. So not just water diverters or municipalities that rely on that water. All of that will be laid out in a study that will look at the pros and cons and the realities of making that revenue stream happen. The Eel Russian Project Authority does have the ability to issue bonds. That's a very common way of financing projects, large capital public infrastructure projects. Is a $50 million capital cost right now. We are hoping that we can offset the needed financing for those bonds in user payments, in grants from federal agencies. So it is not all just debt repayment that's required to build this facility. But a lot needs to be determined moving into the next few years. I don't have an answer for you. There's not $50 million in the bank with the Eel Russian Project Authority right now to build it. There is no money set aside right now. All the money that has been pledged is being used for the planning and the design work. That doesn't, some of that money, those sources don't preclude saving some of that money for the capital investment. We haven't gotten to the point where we're able to get past the immediate need of funding the environmental compliance and the design work. That is many millions of dollars that are required right now. And we have secured those monies. So we're hard at work looking at all additional sources to offset that big capital expense.
Can I hear from Sonoma County what they feel about the funding?
Yeah, so I wear two hats. One as the executive director of the Eel Russian Project Authority, and as of tomorrow as an assistant general manager for Sonoma Water. So I do represent both organizations. And my answer, if I'm talking from the Sonoma Water customer side, it's advocating for more beneficiaries to pay for the benefit of this project than less. That would be our customers' answer to that question.
Well, I have a picture
I'm sorry, just one second, because Eric wanted to add something. Yeah, I just wanted to add to David's comments. So, I mean, I guess the perspective I would put it in is, and working on these types of projects all around the state, it is very difficult to get a federal agency to make a commitment to invest in construction without planning being complete, without a completed environmental impact report or environmental impact statement. And that's also true for many state programs. So the Department of Water Resources, Bureau of Reclamation, Army Corps of Engineers, it is very uncommon to get significant or any construction funding prior to having a completed planning process. So, I mean, just think about it from those agency standpoint, and frankly, from your standpoint as a taxpayer. You don't want to speculate on a project. You don't want the government to be in project speculation business, and that's what it is before planning is complete. And so how do you know what you're investing in, whether it's viable, what it's going to cost, who's going to do it, right? You need to get to a certain point in the process before you make that commitment of large funding, annually or through a grant agreement.
And I'll just go back to what David said, which was the Bureau of Reclamation had conditionally awarded a $15 million grant for finishing design, environmental, and construction. And unfortunately, that was frozen along with billions of dollars of grants by the federal government. But I think we're still pushing on it, and if anyone has the ear of the Commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation, we'd be happy for you to pass that word along.
Well, I have a picture of Gavin Newsom standing on the dry lake bed of Lake Mendocino in 2021 at the end of the rainy season, saying this plant and that drought was to raise the dam. I wrote him a letter and I said, do you realize that raising the dam won't make it rain? So, given that, it kind of makes me doubt a lot of the assumptions associated with this. You got to prove it to me before I believe it,
Well, we invite you to continue to attend the community meetings. We invite you, when it's not Thanksgiving week, to sit down with Don and his modeling to show where the assumptions are. If you look at throughout the United States and the world, there are periods of drought, and the way communities get through those are by storing water, which is why we are looking at increased storage. Other questions in the room?
This doesn't explain why we're taking down the dam.
I understand, and my answer is I'm not taking down the dam, and IWPC is not taking down the dam, and Sonoma Water is not taking down the dam. And I promise you that we will ask PG&E to attend the next meeting, and you can ask that question directly. I'm not trying to avoid answering it. I just don't speak for them.
I'm taking down the dam.
She's taking down the dam. Talk with her.
Why, thank you. I'm Clay Romero. I'm from Willits. I've heard you mention several times the word decommission. Decommission, in my mind, I don't know how you feel about it. And by the way, you're really gifted engineers, and I appreciate that. But the term decommission means we're going to cease operating. But that's not actually what's going to be happening. I've heard the term removal. And, well, it sounds a little strange. I've never heard of anybody removing a dam, like you're going to move it somewhere else. The term you haven't used yet is destroy. We're going to destroy a dam. And I think that's what people here are thinking about. And that's an important factor. So anyway, I just thought I'd bring that to your attention because I'm not sure if saying decommissioning or removing is actually getting to the core of the matter. Thank you.
Words are important. And I'll say that we use the word decommissioning because that's the word under federal law. Yeah. Okay? Now, I'll say it in your words. PG&E is asking FERC for permission to destroy the dam. I'm not disputing that, right? I'm just speaking about what the legal process is, but you're right. That is what's being requested, to destroy it, to remove it, to eliminate it, to make it as though it was never there. That is what PG&E is applying for.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Do any of our elected board members, there's another gentleman here.
Because I'm the oldest guy in the room here, I want to say a few words about this, okay? First of all, this is the best meeting I've seen. I've been to every one of these meetings, and this is the best one I've ever seen. I don't know if we have enough people here from Lake County or Sonoma County, but this is a good group, and I think you've done a good job. Now I want to talk about what the real problems are, okay? We've been paying $18 to $20 an acre foot for water. We're the envy of the whole damn state, probably the envy of anybody in the country, all right? Now we're looking at $200 to $300 an acre foot. That's an absolute disastrous, you guys. It's going to wipe out every damn piece of farming from here to the Bay Area, and you know that as well as I do. You can't spend $300 an acre foot and grow grapes. You can't grow anything for that, not even mushrooms, okay? And the next thing I want to talk about is this whole nonsense about the farmers and the ranchers and everybody destroying the salmon industry. The salmon industry was destroyed by the Japanese in the 1990s. They strung a 3,700-mile net across the North Pacific that wiped out the whole salmon industry all the way up and down the coast. In Canada, they folded up completely and just bought up all of the licenses. Alaska was lucky because they're a little bit further away, but that wiped out the whole salmon industry. We had nothing to do with it. For 100 years, the farmers, the ranchers, and the lumbermen all worked together along with the fishermen. So don't let that don't let that business stop you. The next thing I want to talk about is that the building of this business of paying the Indians in Covelo $1 million a year. What the hell's the matter with us? Have we lost our minds? We paid them $1 million a year. The two rivers don't even come together but 20 miles down the road. Okay, and it doesn't. Our water coming from Pillsbury has nothing to do with Covelo. Not one thing. Not a bit. The other thing I want to talk about is what is this going to do to the assessed valuation of all of our properties, all right? When I came here 60 years ago, I moved into Potter Valley. I couldn't believe how great it was. All of that water just growing hay like crazy and raising a whole bunch of kids. And it was just absolute heaven. But if we raise the price of all of this water to $200 a foot, that's all gone, you guys, every bit of it. And we got to watch that more than anything. There's also been, you guys don't know it, but back in the 80s, we had another committee like yours, and we were talking about building the Dos Rios Dam. Well, that will come someday, not in my lifetime, I'm sure, not probably in yours. But this whole state is out of water. And they're looking at this water up here with a green eye, boy, I'll tell you. And it's going to come because the Colorado River water is all divided up, and we've lost 90% of that. And they're looking at that Dos Rios Dam, and it'll someday take over. You want me to hang up? Pardon me?
Just think away from me.
Oh, is that too close? Well, I'm looking over there. If you can't hear me over there, put your hand up, please. All right? Okay. All right. Is that all I need to talk about, Mom? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your comments. Anybody else? Oh, right there. Question right there.
Hello, my name is Dakota Perez. I'm from the Yurok tribe in Klamath, California, and I'm a Pomo descendant. And how do you take this? I just want everyone in this room, everyone who's online, anyone who doesn't know, and whoever needs reminding, you are on native land, and this is native water, native fish, native everything. I want all of you to remember that. This is native land, native water. This is our fish. This is not your water. Sorry, farmers. Sorry, everyone with the beautiful, nice little cabin on Lake Pillsbury. It's going to be gone. Oh.
Thank you for your comments. Anybody else? So I'm going to suggest that perhaps public elected officials might have something to say, and then the chairs can close their meetings. Do anybody have anything, or just the chair? Why don't you give it to the supervisors?
Maybe I'll go up here. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for showing up today for this discussion and the workshop. I think that people come to this at different points in time. We had a meeting in May where a lot of this was laid out. And for some people, that was the first time they'd heard about it. For some people, maybe today is the first time you've heard about it. Maybe some people will hear about it for the first time tomorrow, you know. And so it just, the point is that we're all coming to this. We're learning more information. This is a lot of information was provided today. And thank you to all the panel for showing up on this Monday afternoon and Thanksgiving week. Really appreciate that. And really the genesis of this meeting today was because the Board of Supervisors did a resolution. And one of the things in the resolution was that we needed to have more information to the public about the process that we've been through, what we're going through, and the vision for the future. And I think that what we've laid out today is kind of that vision. You know, what we're dealing with, the reality, but also how do we get
how do we survive as a county, communities with this reality that PG&E has left us in. And so I really appreciate Janet Pauley because the board asked for more information for the public. And Janet said, yeah, let's get these people together. And she called up Eric and Tom and Scott and David and Don and got them all together to provide this workshop today. So I think it's really important that we appreciate the work that Janet continues to do on behalf of all of our communities. And so there's very good work being done. And when I look at the resolution that the Board of Supervisors passed, it's really acknowledging that the work that the IWPC has been engaged in for many, many years is very important, and we respect that work. And we're going to, we see that as the path forward to making our communities whole again through this process. And we're also calling for, greater storage and explore all those issues that we talked about today, because without the storage, without these studies, without all this work collaboratively to make the two basins whole, it doesn't work. And so that's what the Mendocino County Board of Supervisors is putting forward, is that our support is with this process. And we know that there are issues with it, that we have to maintain, we're also asking, and it was brought up earlier, about PG&E. What are they going to do to make our communities, whole, or mitigate this destruction of the dams that they're putting forward? And so we're asking them to come up with a plan to really study the economic, harm that's going to be done to the communities, and to the social network that's happening too. We need to be looking at all of those issues. And so that's what our resolution really calls for, is supporting what the IWPC is doing and moving forward, looking at these issues that the communities need to deal with as far as storage, different opportunities, and have PG&E be accountable to what is going on with their transition. But for them, it's a bottom line. So again, I really want to thank all of you for coming, and Janet Pauley and the panel for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you. I've left on the screen for a few minutes the websites for the organizations. I'll just switch to the thank you screen, which has the email address for each of us, in case you want to follow up with any of us. And not seeing any further questions, I'll hand it off to these two folks to end their meeting.
Right. So at 3:58, we will adjourn the meeting of the Board of Supervisors of Mendocino County.
And at 3:58 and 25 seconds, I will adjourn the meeting of the Mendocino County Inland Water and Power Commission. Thank you all very, very much for coming.